Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is October 15th, and the time is a little bit after 7:30. We have quite a bit to go through on this committee of the whole meeting, but before I do so, I just want to read a quick note for the floor that it will be open for the audience for 20 minutes to address City Council on matters that are on the agenda after the City Council has discussed with staff that item. We ask that persons wishing to address the City Council keep their comments to 5 minutes in length, and comments must be addressed to the council as a whole through the mayor, and profanity may not be used in any form. Diving right in, we're going to start with the first item, fiscal year 2020 budget for the library. Mr. Ruff, if you are available, you're welcome to come up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Normally, Barry introduces me, and he always introduces the library as the city's little brother. And I like that, but I don't like the fact that he always makes me wear his hand-me-down clothes when I come in, and it doesn't fit, as you can see. So
I only gave him a tie this time.
This is a pleasure. Anyway, thank you. If you look at our presentation, it's going to be set up kind of like a balance sheet. So the first 4 slides are going to deal with the income side. And what you can see from page 1 here is that we're anticipating a levy decrease of 2% for 2020. Now, that's because we finished our construction project, and we're not going to obviously expect the levy to stay up high. The project was finished on time and under budget by about $11,000. So we're tired, and we're glad that we're not building anything for next year. We do have some other capital projects, but they don't involve bricks and mortar. And these last 2 construction projects we did created no debt whatsoever. We saved up our money, paid for it, and we're all done. If you go to page 2, what you see there is that this is budget's going to result in, on average, $1.18 per resident property tax decrease. Now, it's important, I guess, for us to talk a little bit about where our money comes from, and it's basically 2 flavors of money. It's predominantly property tax money. As you can see here in 2020, that's about 6% is all other, and 94% is the property tax amount in white down there. So we are very much reliant upon property taxes. The all other includes things like PPRT, which is kind of like a corporate sales tax. There's a per capita grant from the state, about $30,000. Interest income, all sorts of other things, and then we also throw in our capital reserves. And in 2020, we're going to be throwing in about $94,000 to buy a new integrated library system, which is like our computerized card catalog, but a lot more. It will now be one-stop searching for everything from books to magazine articles to AV, anything you can imagine that's in our collection, it'll all be there, and you won't have to do separate searches on anything. The reason that we're making the move right now is normally you expect to get about 10 years out of an ILS. It's a computer system, so every 2 years is about a generation for that kind of a system. We've gotten 12 years already, and the company is talking about not supporting it anymore. So we're going to have to upgrade, and it's about time that we do it. So this again shows the percentage breakdowns, and again the point is that 94 and 6% differential as far as property tax to all other is more typical. Last year the all other category was much higher, and that was because we put in $220,000 of our capital reserve money to do the construction that we did this year. So that project's done, and now we can start to move back to something more normal for us. There is one other thing coming up next year, and that is our 60th anniversary. as a library. And so we're going to be doing some special programming to say thank you to the community, because as you can see, they've supported us awfully well for an awfully long time. And so we do want to say thanks. And there'll be some programming that we'd like to invite you all to come to, and you'll get more about that as time goes on. If you look at now moving over to the next 4 slides, expenditure history, what you can see here is there are 2 spikes there, and those are the construction projects. Again, both of them came in under budget, created no debt, and now we're trying to move back to sort of a normal operating procedure. In 2021, though, we will have recarpeting and renovation. We normally hope in public buildings that are high traffic to get 10 to 12 years from our carpet. We're pushing 17 right now, and so it's important. I know some of you all have come over, and Alderman Snike, I apologize, came over and she had to sit through my speech about different types of yarn, and she actually acted interested, and so I appreciate that. All right, here's the operating budget, operating and reserves, and again, you can see that the 2 spikes are really from the capital projects that we had. Staffing history for us, and this is going way back, wanted to show really the continuity here, because we've had 2 restructurings on how we do the staffing, and we probably do it a little different than any other library around here. The first one involved the fact that we don't have any shelvers. We all shelve. If you work on a public desk or you're in administration, you're all shelving. So we have no designation of shelver. The advantage is that when the cart of books that you have to shelve is done being shelved, you can go on to other work. Shelvers, when the books are shelved, then they got to wait for more books. The other thing is it helps us to know what is moving. And so our weeding is much better since we also do the shelving. The second one that we did here, you can see around 2010, we downsized and we did a roaming customer service. When desks get busy, one of the ways that you deal with that sometimes is just hire more people. But the busy doesn't always stay at the same desk on the same day even. So what we did is we put in roaming customer service. So these are people that are trained to work at any of the public desks, and they move to wherever the action is that night. And that saves us from triple staffing at one desk, and then what do you do when the crowd isn't there on the next night? So this allowed us to go ahead and meet that without having to increase staffing. What you can see here is that since 2000, we've downsized by about 20%, and done it without really missing a beat. And the important thing on this graph is to show that it wasn't a gimmick. When we've done a downsizing, we've tried to do it thoughtfully, and then we've maintained it so that it wasn't something where we go down by 5% and then the next year go up by 10. We've maintained it, and the staff is to be congratulated on having worked on that. They've all done a good job. Materials is a very interesting, to a librarian, discussion because it's formulaic. To be a member of the library system, you have to spend at least 12% of your non-capital, non-computer, non-reserve budget on materials. And that's so you don't end up impoverishing yourself and being a burden to your neighbors. Now, for our library, we're what's considered a mature library. In other words, all of our shelves are full. And so when a new box of books comes in the back door, we have to take a box of books off of the shelves because there isn't additional shelf space. And then those books go into the book sale. So given that, about $400,000, anything in that range is good for us as far as what we're purchasing. We have a very good items per capita count. Very competitive with all the big libraries around us. And so that's not a big problem for us. And now we're able, with ebooks, to add even more materials because the electrons take relatively little space. One of the problems with the ebooks is that more and more of them are being sold now, and they're called metered, meaning after they're checked out, say 10 times, they just go poof, and they're gone. So it used to be you buy them, you have them forever. Most are still that way, but the percentage that are metered are going up. So normally we budget 12%. Because we are a mature library, we don't need more than that. The formula this year, or for 2020, comes out to $429,000. That's good. And I would expect that if you look at 2019 and 2020, if we can remember to look in a couple of years, we will end up having spent more than what we budgeted. Because what we do is at the end of the year, any money that we have been able to save on other projects, we pile it back into things that are directly helpful to the patrons, like computers, more books, e-books, things like that, and consumables like light bulbs, toner, paper, things that we know we have to buy anyway. And that way, that takes off pressure for the following year. So that's the plan, and the $429,000 should be very good. Now, one of the reasons you definitely want to make sure you abide by that 12% rule is that if you're not in the system, you don't get reciprocal borrowing privileges at your neighbor libraries, and you don't have interlibrary loan privileges with the libraries all over the country. And the third thing is you don't get a per capita grant from the state, which for us is worth about $30,000. So those are all good reasons for us to spend the 12%, even though that's probably a bit higher than we have to spend if there wasn't such a rule. Okay, now I mentioned that we have the 60th anniversary coming up, and by the way, I want to just mention our board president Dick Wright is here, and one of our board members Sylvia Vange. If you want to say hello, I know some of you have met them. They're here, and they're helping us plan thank yous to the city. It's not so much a celebration of us as a thank you of you all and what you've done for us. It is important, though. Sometimes I run into patrons, and they'll say, well, what really is the mission of the public library? I mean, everybody knows it's there. You just kind of take it for granted. And in 2 slides, I think I can explain it. One is from a drawing that I have at my house. And that's it in a nutshell. It's Abe Lincoln sitting there reading a book. And at the top it says, "The will to learn counts most." I had some folks that looked at this and they said, well, that's interesting. We get what you're trying to say about self-education, but gosh, it's old-fashioned. I mean, he's reading a book and he's sitting on logs and he's in front of a fire. And I think that gives us the opportunity to kind of branch off and talk a little bit here, because the mission has not changed, even though the delivery system has. I mean, now you've got e-books, you've got audio books, you've got computers, you've got databases. You can access the library from your house 24 hours a day and do many things you could never do even if you came to the library now, because of the databases that we have. There's audio books. But the magic really comes between whatever material it is and whatever delivery system it is and the person that has the will to learn. And that hasn't changed. And we do think self-education changes lives. American public libraries started in 1854, and you'll be proud to know that public libraries are a uniquely American invention. They were invented because we didn't have a very strong or good higher education system back then. And they felt that if people were going to continue in a democracy, they needed to know things. And if they were going to continue to improve, they wanted to give them a chance to become whatever they wanted to be. But the library allows you to continue your education. We also hope with children's programs to provide some enthusiasm for learning and for literacy. And so those are the 2 main things. In a nutshell, though, if you have to think of it another way, there's another way to think of it, is that we think of ourselves as the university of you. I mean, you're the faculty, you're the student, and we are your library. So, that's our mission. That's our levy. And I want to thank the city and especially all these folks standing back here, because every department in this city has helped us virtually every month. And we've got a very good relationship with them. Barry and Melissa in particular spend a lot of time helping us, and we appreciate it. So thank you for your hospitality and your support. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them for you.
Alderman Sonoyka.
Thank you, Director Ruff, for your presentation. You mentioned that material expenditures might be receiving a more unpredictable line item going forward. Have you calculated the risk of metered materials down the line, perhaps next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years?
Well, I don't think, it's not going to be unpredictable, because it's got to be 12% of that formula that I gave you. So that much we know. Now, the mix of how much is ebooks as opposed to print, as opposed to audio, and that is going to change. And we're going to be spending a lot of time next year preparing for the renovation in 2021, because the mix of books and ebooks has an effect on how you create the main space of the library. So that will be a difference. But as far as items per capita, we're in really good shape, and we're going to continue with that. I think when you were over, we talked, and we did a very kind of thorough walkthrough, but some of the things that'll be in the offing is we're finding that more and more people are coming in for programming, and they're coming in to use study space. Like those individual study rooms are very, very popular. And so part of self-education is having the space to do the work and then have access to everything. But we're finding that having individual computers, for instance, that's going down, because more and more people are walking around with their phones and using our Wi-Fi. And we're probably going to end up going to more face-out shelving, so it looks a little more commercial, quite frankly. Having right now about 250,000 items, we could probably pare that down a little bit and do more work and become less of a warehouse and more current. We will never get, though, like a bookstore where they just have 100 copies of every bestseller and nothing else. So I don't know if am I hitting the gist of your question on that?
Yes, I wanted to just make sure that the library is considering, if we are using more and more ebooks and metered copies, if we're losing them after 10 uses, if those types of habits or metrics are being captured and included in the decision-making process. And it sounds like it is.
They are, and quite frankly, with the print books, after 10 uses, depending on the books, they're about ready to be recycled too. So it's, at first when we heard the whole concept of metered, and we thought, oh my, we paid for this, and now it goes away. And we thought, well, realistically, how long does a heavily used bestseller, how many circs do you get out of it? And some of the stuff you want to go away, because what's hot this year, you can't keep 30 copies of something that's hot right now. You're going to have to get rid of some of it. Now, what you can't do is it's going to be a little tougher on the Friends book sale, because when the electrons go poof, there's nothing to sell. So we are going to have to be aware of that. So it is an exciting time, believe it or not, to be a librarian, because all this stuff is new.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Further comments or questions?
Yeah.
Alderman Budmats.
How many cardholders do you presently have?
17,000.
And how many items are you getting checked out per year per cardholder on average?
Well, I'd have to do math on that. Can tell you we got about 260,000 checkouts last year. Somebody got a calculator? I was told there would be no math.
Is it static, or is it rising, falling? Where is it at?
Falling. It's falling because I think reading habits are changing a bit. There's a lot of stuff that you can now get off of the internet that you used to have to check out a book for. For instance, your child has to do a book report on Brazil. They used to have to come in and check out 10 books on Brazil, and now they just go onto our website and get a database answer and print that stuff out, and the schools accept it, and that's okay. So in some ways, what's interesting is some of the things that we've done that are improvements that patrons want are also things that hurt the old-fashioned statistics. For instance, people wanted you to have your databases available 24/7 on your website, so in February, when it's 40 below out, they don't have to actually walk to the library, especially if it's 10 o'clock at night. Well, what do you think that does to visits to the library? Visits to the website go way up, and people like the service. Visits to the library, maybe not so much. I mentioned the Wi-Fi thing, too. We put in Wi-Fi, very high-speed Wi-Fi, and we noticed and we predicted that people walking in to use the computers, those statistics were going to go down because people are just now walking in and using their own piece of equipment. And that's good. Again, it's more service. The frustration we have sometimes is that the statistics that are collected by the state are the same ones that they collected prior to internet, other than just internet usage at the library. And they have not recognized things like usage on your website or your databases or things like that. So that's a problem. You may ask, why, with all that, do you have any, like computers? If people are moving away from that and moving towards their own devices, why would you have any computers in the library? And the answer is that a big portion of one of the big groups in the library are senior citizens who may or may not either have the computers at home or may not feel comfortable with them. And so it's good that they can come in and work on it, and they have a reference librarian right there to help them if they get themselves stuck. So there is always a little bit of a tension between trying to be ahead of the wave with new users, but also realize that some of our users are not there yet. And we find that out sometimes in January when people come in after Christmas. Some of our older folks, I remember one that came in with the package still wrapped, and it was an iPad, and she just took it to our reference librarian and said, I have no idea how to use this. What do I do with it? So being there to be intermediary of technology is helping. But that means that some of the traditional numbers, like circulation, old-fashioned print circulation, it's going down a little bit.
Thank you.
Alderman Bessetti.
Just to answer your question before, 15.3 per cardholder.
All right. Thank you. By the way, one other thing on that is you might say, well, why, if it's free, why don't we have all 25,000 residents, why don't they all have a card? Some people don't want their kids to have their own cards, is one thing. Or so you'll have like a family card, and that's fine. You could get a card for an infant. We would love that. But that's why no library really has 100%.
Real quick, Dave, you mentioned that you run analysis and you are observing that patron behavior is changing. The conference rooms are going up, hard copy or PCs are going down in terms of usage. Is the materials evaluation looking toward different components like 3D printers and incorporating those into the library?
Well, you've hit on one that's a big debate in the library world, because there are many libraries that got 3D printers and are now trying to get rid of 3D printers because they don't get used a lot. Some of the problems have occurred, for instance. I know one library, we directors get together occasionally to talk about this, and one of the discussion points was, well, I sold this to my donor group at the Friends, and now it just isn't getting used, because what you can use it for instance, here's 3 examples. One is person wanted to make a birdhouse with a 3D printer. It's a fine thing to make, but it occupied the 3D printer for like a week. And so they had to come up with rules about what types of things you could make. You've probably read about 3D printers that you can make weapons, guns with them, the components to put a gun together. And so every library has since said, okay, none of that. You're not going to do that. When I talk to some of the people, I say, what do they use them for? Boy Scouts will make buttons to advertise what they're doing. One place got themselves into a position where they went with the 3D printer on the theory that, well, it doesn't really have to do with literacy so much, but it's kind of almost like a craft item. And so we want to have it so people can use it. And then they had a sewing group that met at their library. We do too. We have the quilters. And so the sewing group said, well, you have a 3D printer. Why don't you have a room just dedicated to sewing machines so we can use that? And it started to devolve. And that's where the debate goes, is with regard to your mission, where does that fit in? Some libraries see it, some libraries don't see it. The trend right now is a little bit kind of moving away and saying, well, that if your space is a little bit limited, not quite sure where that fits in. It certainly fits in, like at the junior college level, in that you can see it. Boy, it really hits there.
But the organization is doing some sort of value-benefit analysis on what equipment or innovation should be brought into the library.
I mean, we have to, because we do have, even though we have really good facilities, there's still limited space. We were able to put in the 2 individual meeting rooms because that was such a high priority for patrons. And they wanted some place that was more of a lounge that had vending in it, and that was a high priority. So we were able to tick off those 2. Right now, I'm not sure there's a lot of more room, but as we go through the year, we start out with a blank sheet for the entire main floor, and we just say, okay, if you work in an area as an employee, you're on the committee to help design that area, so that we don't have people afterwards saying, well, this isn't practical, because everybody's going to have their chance. But what you're referencing is exactly the kind of discussion that has to go on.
Okay. Thank you. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, I appreciate you coming up here, and it's not often we get to talk about percent levy decreases.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Moving right along with the continuity of budgets, fiscal year 2020 budget for the city of Rolling Meadows. Ms. Gallagher, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. Tonight we are going to continue our budget discussion for the 2020 proposed budget. In your council packet there is a write-up, but we're also going to go through a brief PowerPoint presentation as well. Our budget for the City of Rolling Meadows really is a commitment to fiscal responsibility and financial excellence, and that's demonstrated by our achievements in financial reporting and also in our budget award programs. We do have and developed fund balance policies for our general fund, our refuse fund, and our 911 fund. And we also are in parameters in this budget for each of those policies. The city's credit rating. It is a commitment by the City of Rolling Meadows to perform. And with that, our Standard & Poor's rating is a AA+, and our Moody's is an AA3. Our credit rating agencies indicate that that is a show of our strong commitment to reserves and meeting our financial obligations. And it really tells the story about the City of Rolling Meadows and its strong financial reserves as well. We had a slide like this last year. We wanted to update it. We were able to add a few more. So these are our restaurants and some of our local businesses as well. It's a really nice display that really shows all of the commitment out there in the city. We want to continue to add logos and new brands and new businesses in the City of Rolling Meadows. So we're very happy to have this slide in our budget presentation. So our budget calendar really begins as soon as one budget ends in December. We then pick up, and then we are planning for the next year's budget. So that begins in about January timeframe. However, even though we're planning it 1 year at a time, our budget is only 1 year, we are looking out ahead. So we're always thinking about the next years ahead, including our tax levy. For this budget, this was presented to the City Council with the September 10th City Council packet, and it's also available at the library and also on our city's homepage. We have completed, with the city manager and myself, the finance director, our initial one-on-one budget meetings with all the city council members and the mayor. And we've also received some questions and along the way through the process. We're also happy to entertain more meetings as they come up and answer more questions, because that's what the process is all about. The public hearing for the tax levy and the city's tax levy and the library's tax levy took place at the September 24th City Council meeting. And the public hearing for the city's budget and the library's budget took place at the October 8th City Council meeting. When we file with various agencies, we have to document that those hearings did take place. We have some remaining dates coming up. Of course, tonight's discussion. October 22nd will be our first reading for the tax levies. We have November 12th continued on with City Council meeting and some of the second readings. And then whether or not we need it or not, in years past, if we don't have a need for a continued budget discussion, then we will take that off the agenda if that is something the City Council desires. Typically, November, by that time frame, we've wrapped up by then. So really that November 26th time frame, the City Council meeting, that would be our last meeting to adopt the city's budget and accept the library budget. This budget really continues our strong investment into capital infrastructure across all cities' funds, and we'll get into that. It also is what you might call as a maintenance budget for the general fund and all funds. We have parameters of 15% to 30% for our fund balance policy for the general fund, and the estimate for 2020 is about 3 months reserves, or 24.8%. So we're right within that parameters. For the general fund, the year-over-year change in revenues is about 1.6%, or about $548,000, and year-over-year change in general fund expenditures is 1.4%, or by $480,000. The city continues to pursue actively economic development activities across the city, and then also enhancing community events. And it really does show in what we see in revenues: food and beverage taxes, sales tax, and other revenue line items. We are monitoring the state's impact. Should there be changes from the state of Illinois, we have our council and our mayor and our city manager always monitoring and making sure we have the right information. We just always have to plan for uncertainties from the state of Illinois. As an example, while we have an increase in the state amount for the motor fuel tax, the state portion, we are not including that estimate in our current 2020 budget because of the uncertainty, and we have to make sure that the state of Illinois first releases those funds. If that were to be, then we would increase the reserves overall for the state motor fuel tax as an example. So right now, we're going to go through this budget presentation, but again, I just wanted to mention that our fund balance policies are for the general fund, the refuse fund, and the 911 fund. Probably in the December timeframe, we'll come back with a fund balance parameter policy for the garage fund, probably December timeframe. We do not have any increases in utilities for this budget. Of course, we'll get into that too, but that really is the work of the Baxter and Woodman rate study, and then also we issued bonds in 2018 and 2019. Chipper services, that's on the agenda for tonight for discussion. It is not in the proposed budget. As mentioned, all of our one-on-one meetings have been completed, and there is only one part-time position that is elevated to a full-time position in the utilities fund. And as always, as discussed with the City Council during our one-on-one meetings, there are no new positions unless the City Council does bring them up. And of course, once the adopted budget is completed, as done in years past, further discussions about open positions such as the fire inspector position would be discussed with the City Council, and a budget amendment would be brought forward for City Council approval, depending on their discussion. This slide does show you just 16 cents of every tax dollar is attributed back to the City of Rolling Meadows. And so our share of the tax levy for the city's portion is about 16%. It's good to see that slide just because of the fact that we want to make sure that folks know you're getting a lot for a value for your dollar. This slide also, all of these slides are in the proposed budget, but this shows the current outstanding debt service all the way out to 2039. Our fund balance summary sheet here for the 2020 proposed budget will show you all of the funds with an estimated ending fund balance for 2019, revenues and expenditures all in, and then the estimated ending fund balance for the 2020 proposed budget. This also is in the proposed budget document. What's important to note, we've really come a long way as a city. We have just one negative fund, which is the TIF number 2 fund for Kirchhoff and Owl. And what's important is that fund will naturally become positive towards the end of its term. This slide does show that progress for the general fund in particular. As you can see, about 10 years or so in the past, we were coming out of a negative fund balance position and has slowly made very much many strides, with now about a 3-month reserve for the general fund. Speaking about the general fund, we like to show it in different ways to give that high-level view for expenditures. This one in particular will show you by department, being that we are a service organization, a government entity, providing majority of our services would be public safety, but then followed by public works and general government and so on. About 60% or more is related to our important and critical service needs of public safety. Further broken down for the general fund expenditures, as you might expect, a service entity, a governmental agency such as ours, is about 83% for salaries and benefits, and doing exactly what we're doing every day, providing services to residents and businesses. Pausing for just a moment for the property tax levy, it's important to sort of look at the dynamics of our property tax levy in that just about 1/3 of the overall property tax levy is attributed to all of the revenues in the general fund. So it's a very diverse makeup when you think about it for the general fund. All of our revenues in the general fund provide a very diverse stream for the city. I wanted to highlight here at the bottom, when we think about our property tax levy and why this is important, and I know there's a lot of hard work that we've done over the years and will continue to do so. About 60% of the overall property tax levy is attributed to pensions. While we're learning now that there is more work in Springfield that's happening at this time, we're hopeful that that will help us down the road. But for right now, about 60% of the overall tax levy. And that's also the reason for the increase for this year as well. When we're looking at our pension funds, the total liabilities is what we look at, and this is actually data right from our city's audit for 2018, and a slide that was presented in June of this year. But our pension funds, which does include the police pension and the fire pension, we didn't include IMREF, we're just looking at these two particularly. Total liabilities outstanding equal about $154 million. Now, when you think about that, I just always like to footnote that this was as of December 31st, 2018. New numbers will not be brought out until December 31st, 2019 in our audit that's presented in June 2020. Our net position, or our assets to that, when you compare the two, are $75 million. So our total net position is a total of liabilities, which is really known as the funded ratio status, is about 50%. Why this is important is that, again, the state of Illinois is compiling data, and they're using our data as well amongst all of these 650 Article 3 and 4 pension funds across the state. But again, this is attributed to the city's property tax levy as an annual contribution. So taking a look at the property tax levy, and this is also in the council write-up as well for tonight, the proposed 2020 budget is considering to use reserves, as discussed previously, to reduce the property tax levy amount from about $1 million to $350,058, which is bringing it down from a 7.1% change year over year to 2.4% increase for 2020. And again, the primary reason is that pension liability. We are also of course, we have to report all of this item and then also provide an ordinance. And when we do that, we have to show that as a dollar amount on the ordinance, the tax levy ordinance. So the reduction that we have to do, and I'm going to walk you through this so that you have an idea. I'm going to come back to this slide. But on October 22nd, City Council meeting, we'll have first reading for the property tax levy. And when we do that, we actually have to show the dollar amount that we're levying. So when we use reserves, we actually have to modify the police protection line item and the fire protection line item and reduce those line items by those reserves amount, because Cook County will not accept other than what you're levying. So you basically have to communicate with them on your ordinance the dollar amount that you're levying. As noted in the write-up, and as we discussed in our one-on-one council meetings, that we would restore those amounts for the 2021 budget. So I wanted to kind of jump back and forth just a little bit. So when we look at what's developed into the proposed budget, which is the draft working scenario, we have police and fire protection line items at $1,850,000. And so to reuse reserves, we would reduce those line items by $338,054. And that would be restored in the next year's levy. But for this year, funding the 2020 budget, because we need to levy by dollars, we would take those reserves and equally distribute them between police protection and fire protection. And what that does to the overall levy, as we discussed, brings a 2.4% overall increase to the levy, which is $350,058. What I wanted to also share, and that's also in your write-up as well, is when we originally proposed the levy, and it's in the proposed budget, we were proposing that on the full $1 million or 7% levy increase. And the detail that shows under that is the overall change or dollar increase to the levy for taxpayers. So if you own a home and you're valued at a certain amount and you pay $2,500, that amount would be an estimated increase back to the taxpayer. So that range from, if your tax bill is $2,500 all the way up to $20,000 per year, the portion that goes back to the city is shown on this slide and is also shown in the council packet. And so that range would also be denoted here as well. So that would go from $10 to $78 based on a 2.4% increase. The reason for the other piece that was in the proposed budget is that was originally proposed at $1 million change. I just wanted to footnote that because it's important when you're looking at the overall change for taxpayers. I did want to just pause here for just a moment. I know we have some questions at the end of the presentation, but wanted to see if there were any initial questions on the property tax levy as I walk them through.
Sure. Any questions so far? Alderman Sunoika.
I would just ask that Director Gallagher please provide more background as to why the city is required to meet this increase this year for many residents that I had called this past week.
Well, as we discussed, we were accumulating reserves in the Public Works line item for 2019, and that was reduced for 2020, for the 2020 proposed budget. We then also have this year the debt service payments for 2018 and 2019 bonds. So we also have pension changes, as you can see, about $880,000 in pension changes. And so all of that accumulates to a tax levy increase, and that's the reason why. Attributed solely to mostly the pensions, but then we also accumulated reserves for the debt service payments, but this year we had to add that as well.
I also had some residents ask if these increases would be sustained to future years as well.
And that's a really good question. And I think that comes up, and obviously we mentioned when we're talking about budgets, we're not just looking at 1 year. The uncertainty is the police and fire pensions. Also IMRF, because wherever you land for 12/31 is your investment number. And that whole calculation then flows in what the actuary tells you to levy that year. And so our commitment to the police, fire, and IMRF pension funds is to levy an appropriate amount to fund them adequately, and we've made that progress over time. Am I going to say exactly what that levy amount? I won't know that because the actuaries have to run their numbers. But how this levy is set up is what we would probably make sure that we're looking at here. So police and fire protection would need to be restored back up to the $1,850,000. The tax levy amounts for police and fire pensions, and then the IMRF amounts would have to be plugged in from the actuary. And then we would look at other things such as the annual street program, the 911 fund, and of course we'd have to plug in the debt service payments as well. So we are looking at those things. Am I going to say exactly where we're going to land? I don't know that until we get our actuary reports in June next year. But we've been in parameters about under 5% over the last few years. We tried to look at this together. Obviously, the city council's input is what's critical. It's a balancing decision process.
And I had one more final question that came up from residents over the past couple of weeks, and it's relating to what the city can do in a situation where the liabilities are essentially out of the city's planning control, since it's through pension boards and through regulations at the state level. I explained that the city council is very cognizant of how many positions we have open for staffing and being aware of our full-time employees and those that are eligible for pension benefits going forward. Director Gallagher, are there any other additional responses that you'd be able to provide at this time for residents that also have that question?
Contact your legislator.
I just overheard City Manager Krumsak mention, speak with your legislator. This is the time. There is a video session that will be taking place at the Illinois General Assembly that will be discussing pension reform. That is so critical right now. It's driving what is happening with our tax levy. So I don't know if that answers your question per se. Anything else you'd like to ask in terms of that?
Well, so the discussion has been that many residents understand that this is a state issue and that they will also be calling their senators and state representatives, which they can find if they log on to the cityrm.org website, go to the left side, scroll down to community portal and insert their address, and then click on the tab that says elected officials. But then they also want to know what the city can be doing in order to, or what control the city has in order to prevent tax levy increases in the future. And so I mentioned that we're very cognizant of staffing. So we won't necessarily always be looking to hire additional staff with pension benefits. For example, we'll be looking to part-time or other types of agreements to prevent additional pension requirements. Are there any other strategies at this time that the city is investigating to ensure that the tax levy is as low as it can be this year and going forward?
So let me just pipe in a little bit. So obviously the biggest way to accommodate what you're asking for is putting more money into the overall pensions, and that goes with the returns and some of the other pieces. But I think when you look back in June, when we looked at how did the general fund end up, and we were between those parameters between 50 and 30%, the additional amount that we put in, and if we continue putting additional amounts, that helps the overall health of the pensions, which actually goes back to what can be levied at that point in time. So that $154 million liability that you saw just for those two pensions, it is very considerable, and that's why our numbers jump up by the 200,000 and 280,000. But not joking around, obviously Alderman Diastis has been on the board the longest, but for 10 plus years, municipalities have been raising their hands and saying, hey, stop this, and we've been down in Springfield a lot between IML, Northwest Municipal Conference, all the different pieces. The iron is kind of warm right now, and legislators are trying to make some change. That change will take some time, even incorporated. And again, you have over 600 pension boards that run themselves and their own returns. When you're able to consolidate, and that's the biggest point of the legislation, is to consolidate it, they actually make more money in their returns, and that's what's hurting the littles and the bigs. Tier 2 did what it was supposed to be done, accommodating some of those changes overall. But again, the biggest thing that residents can do is put comments back to the legislators that this is really needed. We look at all those kind of pieces. We do look at how do you accommodate, and you look at the 2019 budget to the 2020 budget, knowing that there was an increase because of the bonds, how we dealt with the line item for the public works line item, and then reallocating that. So again, residents, we're always looking at that, but the biggest point that I can say is more that you put into the pensions, the lower your increases are going to be. But again, that $154 million liability is really generating that. But if you had a campaign that everybody's contacting every Illinois state senator and representative, then we would have some pension relief. It's going to take a little bit of time, consolidation in how they flow it, but again, if it was a true IMRF-based pension, we would not have as many issues as we have at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll continue. We wanted to highlight a couple things that are also in the proposed budget and also highlighted in our capital plan, which is the commitment to infrastructure and capital projects. As you can see from this pie chart, this is the 5-year look taken from the capital plan, but it does show you at a glance for 2020. And the biggest portion really is to the utilities fund, water, sewer, and stormwater, when you look at the pie chart. So about a $13 million investment for 2020. And I think that really is telling of the amount of infrastructure that is being done for this year. As mentioned, there's no change as proposed in the 2020 budget for utility rates. We put this slide in there. It's the 19 is the current and 2020 is the current. You'll see the same rate. We do that every year just to make sure that you see the change overall. And then we have a footnote at the bottom for 2019. There's no change for the refuse rate as well. Water capital improvement projects, about $4 million of overall capital improvement projects. Really, the bulk of that is the water main projects that are being done with bonds. But then we have the other year-to-year changes for maintenance and improvements, but then really water mains are for 2020. Sewer capital improvement projects, also $1.4 million as an investment into capital improvement projects, with some year-over-year maintenance and rehabilitation projects, but then also true capital as well. For stormwater capital improvement, $660,000. And while we give you the snapshot at a glance, remember that if you did page through the actual 2020 budget, you're going to see the line item detail for each one of these, which also then ties back and correlates to the capital improvement plan as well. Our police vehicles are budgeted in the general fund. So for this year, for 2020, is $154,000 for 3 police vehicles. They are expensed in the general fund. They are not a commodity. They are a commodity item, but they are not included as a capital asset. So we do not depreciate them. That was a decision made several years ago, and it's continued very well. And we continue that moving forward. For 911 fund, the capital improvement project, really the major one there is the mobile data, the CAD program, the record management system that'll be taking place. Some work is being done now, and that will continue for 2020. About $2 million worth of vehicles and equipment, and most of this really is things that have been taking place in terms of the capital improvement program, particularly, for instance, the ERP program, the Enterprise Resource Planning Program, which continues, which is a complete city software update, and then many others as well, such as the refuse truck for next year. Again, vehicles are in the capital improvement program. Those are fully researched and reviewed by the Vehicle Replacement Program or Committee. And then the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee looks at equipment budgeted in the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Program. For about $2 million next year for 2020. For city building improvements, which is in the Building and Land Fund, about $1.2 million currently budgeted. And again, all of these items are in the capital improvement program, but then this 1 year is in the 2020 budget. Between road improvements in the local road fund and the state motor fuel tax program, about $3.6 million worth of local road improvements. And the largest portion of that is the annual street program. Between the two funds, it totals about $1.9 million. If you recall, less than 10 years ago, we were at about a $500,000 annual street program. Year over year, the plan was to slowly phase in an amount and add money to the property tax levy. We're at about $1 million on the property tax levy now, and we've slowly, incrementally changed that over time. So there's a real strong commitment to road improvements for the city of Rolling Meadows. Well, and Thank you, City Manager Crumstock. It's always important to remember, too, on the revenue side, we didn't cover this per se for this presentation, we're just looking at the expenditure side, but the three main sources for the local road fund is the state motor fuel tax fund is its own fund, but for local road, we have the natural gas tax doing exactly what it's doing, providing more revenues into the fund, our property tax levy, and then also our local motor fuel tax on the 11 gas stations at 4 cents per gallon. And so those are the main drivers of revenues for these funds, and it's very critical for the city of Rolling Meadows. I do want to pause here for City Council items. I know we've got questions outlined in the packet, and so I thought I would just turn it back over to City Council. We did want to see if there were any further input on the levy, any other items in the 2020 budget, and then also just thinking about the future in terms of other things that we should start thinking about. As Alderman Sunoika mentioned, how are we looking at the tax levy and those kinds of pieces? So we wanted to turn it over to the City Council for discussion.
And are you expecting council to follow this order? If there's any questions for anyone, feel free to raise your hand. Alderman Cannon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Gallagher, could you answer a question for me? I think I know the answer, but I'd just like to hear it spoken in public. So if we as a council did approve some of these things that are listed up there, did already have money set aside in the budget, how does that affect the overall budget?
You're speaking about any type of line item in the budget?
Like you just had that sheet up, the list was up there. Say if there was a $100,000 item that we turned down. So how does that affect the overall numbers? Does it just come out of the numbers? Can we reduce the tax levy by $100,000 then?
That's a good question, Alderman Cannon. I think it's important to remember the buckets, if you think of it that way. So the funds. The general fund is the primary amount in the tax levy. The items that we just showed you in terms of the capital improvements, that does not affect the general fund.
Okay.
So I think it's just important to remember the buckets of the funds as we think about it. In terms of all of those capital line items or any type of line item, we always have to remember that those items go back to City Council for approval. And so at any time, even though it might be proposed in the budget or it might be in a capital plan, you as a City Council would ultimately determine the fate of that project or that plan. So in terms of reducing the tax levy, it just really have to look at the line items.
Okay, and that's what I thought you would say. So I guess I just would state the same thing I spoke about at the last meeting, that my goal would be this year to have a zero tax increase. I know that's not what's planned right now, but I would like to see anything we could do to try to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Sunoika?
I appreciate Alderman Cannon's bravery. Does he have any proposals for what we would cut in order to be able to not have an increase in the tax levy?
Not at the second, no.
Further comments or questions from the council with regard to these three questions up on the projector or in general? I don't believe we have further comments or questions for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
At this time, I will go ahead and open up the floor. I see a couple names on the sign-in sheet. And again, I just want to quickly remind everyone of the ground rules, no profanity, and keep your comments and questions to 5 minutes at length. And the first name on the list is Glenn T. Glenn Terrace.
Good evening. I've been here before, not since since the new mayor or some of the new aldermen that have come in and sit on the city council. But I thought it important for me to appear tonight because when I just became aware of the tax increase, the levy. I think it was 2.6 or 2.4%. The only way I found out about it was reading the journal over at the library, which the library does a very good job, and they're the only ones that I can see that are reducing the budget, which maybe we should elect him governor of the state of Illinois. But because considering the financial difficulties the state is facing today. But anyway, I talked to Laura, she's my alderman, and we discussed the levy. And the thing I can't understand, and I would recommend every one of you get a copy of this proposed budget and look at it thoroughly, and maybe have a CPA go over it and try to find out where you can cut some of the expenses and where the additional revenues are going. Now, you're taking in additional revenues, and that's what I have a hard time dealing with. You've got gambling going on here in the city, which I was against, but you're taking in additional gambling revenue. You're going to be taking in additional marijuana sales revenue, because you're discussing that now. And when they talked about the levy, they're not talking about the increased assessments of property values. So property values are going to go up. So as property values go up, that means you're going to be paying additional taxes. She doesn't take that into consideration in her proposal. In fact, she didn't even review the revenues. All she talked about was expenses. So I would hope that each one of you aldermen would review this thoroughly. I commend Cannon's response, and I agree with him. Try to come up with a zero tax levy. I'm certain with the additional revenues. In fact, you're going to be taking in additional revenues with the additional property taxes you're going to be getting from the Dominic's property. So here you're going to have all these additional revenues coming in addition to an additional levy on the property tax, which is hard for me to understand. And I used to be an accountant, but I'm retired now. But I know when I pay my own home expenses, I budget myself. I'm retired, I have to budget myself. In fact, I worked for United Airlines, who declared bankruptcy, and I lost my pension. And I think the state ought to do that. Have the state or the city declare bankruptcy. All these pensions then, all those unions, contracts then have to be renegotiated from zero. So take that into consideration. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and I would hope you would thoroughly go over this budget and take into consideration the additional revenues the city is going to be taking in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, it looks like Sam M.
Mokhtarian. Sam Mokhtarian.
Sam Mokhtarian. Come on up, sir.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak. I thought that was just a sign-up sheet for people that come in. I wasn't planning to talk, but anyway, I'm the property owner down the street on Kirchhoff Avenue 2633. A very fine couple last year, about a year ago, they approached us to lease a space for gaming. We signed the lease. Mr. Cromstock wrote a long letter of what the requirements are for them to meet. First, they have to apply for the permit, and it was completely outlined. They signed a 10-year lease. We were looking forward to have some activity in that mall, but unfortunately, it's about a year later, and we still no activities happening. So I just came to the meeting. I heard that they're going to be discussing some of these items about gaming, so I wasn't planning to talk, but I came to listen and see what's going on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I guess before calling the next names, as Melissa Buchholz, and it's just under topic, it says tenant.
She's G1.
You're for G1 then, and not for the city budget?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Are there any further questions or comments from the council regarding the city budget? Seeing none, it looks like we can move forward. That brings us to the Chipper Service, Chipper Week. Alderman Bessetti, how do you want to go about this conversation? You want to tag team it with Director Horn, or do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that's what we'll do. I think the intention here is to research the possibility of restoring the brush collection service that we have had in the past. I know we were challenged for time as far as getting this prepared, so there's still some work that may need to be done. So with that said, if it is going to take longer to do that work, I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be for the 2020 budget. I'm open to for 2021 as well. But I think, I guess, the best thing to do would be to go through the presentation, and then I know I got questions afterwards.
Okay.
Rob.
Director Horn?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Alderman Bessetti, City Council. I'm going to provide you with one of many PowerPoints tonight. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Obviously, as Alderman Bessetti indicated, there was discussion about bringing the Rolling Meadows brush collection back, affectionately known as CHIPPR program. For those of you who might not know, just a brief history, prior to 2008, the city would provide a brush collection service twice a year, once in May and June, once again in September, October. In 2008, though, because of a lack of participation and some budgetary concerns, the City Council cut that service back to once a year. They continued that once a year till 2011, when they saw a decline in participation to about 16%, or 900 residents. That percentage is based on total refuse users, which is about almost 6,000, I think 5,960. And then in 2012, due to the lack of participation, city attempted to do a pay-to-use service, where public works staff would go out to a resident's home, actually measure the quantity and base the fee based on the quantity of brush they had to get rid of. I think there were 56 residents that inquired to have their brush measured, and of that 56, 22 actually participated. So in 2012, the program was eliminated. There are two things we looked at and when we investigated the total cost associated with this program. The first is primary costs. Those are the direct costs associated with the program. First cost, most obvious cost, is the disposal. Where do we get rid of the chips? Historically, prior to 2008, the city had an agreement with the Arlington Heights Park District. The Park District would accept our chips at no cost, and they would use a tub grinder in their yard, and then they would distribute it in their parks and give it to their residents. Two options provided have been used in the past. The first option is basically dumping it in a landfill. Obviously not a sustainable or green-friendly practice, but that is an option we wanted to show. The second option would be to bring the chips back to our site at Birdnick. We would have to stage it in a small corner of the yard, and it would have to be a hauling process that happened in conjunction with the program. We couldn't stage it there during the duration and then haul it off at a later date. We'd have to do it while the program was ongoing, because there's just not room on our site to accommodate that kind of operation. The two costs provided, obviously, $22,500 and approximately $17,000. Purposes moving forward, I use the $17,000 figure for calculating. We would obviously go with the cheaper solution, I would assume. Again, for comparative purposes to private contracting, we provided a labor cost. Basically, the program has to take 4 weeks. It takes 4 employees at 40 hours a week equals 640 man-hours. The 6281 is a cost that we use when we have an insurance claim or something of like. We have those numbers given to us by the finance department every year. It's basically all the union or bargaining unit employees, their salaries added up and divided by the number, so it's just an average of those salaries. And then the equipment costs, obviously for comparative purposes, those are MFT rates provided by the state of Illinois. We don't come up with those rates. Those are provided to us by a government agency. So when you add all those, When you add all those totals up, I didn't provide it on the slide, but it is in your packet. It's approximately $80,000, it's about $78,000 to do the work in-house. We did have did do a little investigation of having contractual services perform the work at a community just south of us, and that extrapolated out was about $94,000. So it's almost $20,000 more than in-house labor. The second cost we looked at were what we call secondary costs, and those are the things, the activities that the programs we built that are highly time-consuming, that are in the optimal time to do the chipping, which is usually the fall. So just to break it down a little bit, prior to 2008, the city did 3 special events. You'll look in your packet this year, I think next year we're planning 20 special events. As a result, summer activities really revolve around special events. From June 1st to September 1st, I think there were 13 to 15 special events. I think the new program actually is more. So when you have those type of events, you cannot allocate manpower to a program that cannot stop. So like a chipper program or a pavement patching program, we can't stop those in between the week to do those. So because of that, we pushed our pavement patching program to September 1st through November 1st, which we're doing that right now. You've probably seen patching occurring throughout the community. We have a huge parkway restoration program, both in the spring for utility repairs and emergency repairs that occurred over the winter. And then again in September, October for those activities, whether it's tree removal or utility repairs that occurred over the summer, get those buttoned up before winter comes, at a time when the seed can germinate. Obviously, you know about holiday lighting. That typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to complete. And tree trimming and tree planting, those are more winter programs, but they go to the beginning of spring and they start at the beginning of fall every year. These are just pointed out because if we were to take on another program in the fall, one of these programs would be impacted from that decision. Again, this is the activities we do from April to May. Based on a conversation I had earlier today, I thought it was important to show some of the things we do during the spring months. Again, it doesn't mean that we can't do the chipper program. We certainly could, but some of these things may be impacted. We may need to contract something out, or we might need to lower expectations of residents, and they would have to understand that, for example, we might not be street sweeping as often as we do, or we might not be getting parkway restorations done as timely as we currently do. So that's just a quick snapshot at some of the things we do in the spring months, April 14th to May 31st. The other thing that I think is important for the City Council to remember is we currently offer, as part of the residents' refuse fee, monthly fee that they pay for a yard waste service that we provide every week from April 1st through December. It is less convenient, I agree, than a brush collection program, because the branches are required to be cut into 4-foot lengths. They can't be more than, I think, 50-pound bundles, things like that. It is more difficult, but again, it is provided 75% of the year, so it's not something that's a one week and done opportunity. Just quickly, if the City Council were to consider doing it contractually, I just provided a pros and cons to each. I won't say one is better than the other. The Public Works operations is obviously cheaper by about $20,000, but again, it may cause a decrease in the level of service in other areas. and it requires the program to be done in the spring as opposed to the fall. Those are the only negatives, drawbacks. And with the contractual services, there's really no impact to staff other than administrative and basically advertising the program and processing invoices. There's not much to that. The negative impact is it at least based on preliminary estimates, it could be more costly. But again, if we did a contractual services, that's a task we would obviously go out to bid and let the private market dictate the cost of that.
Rob, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
When we're looking at this
I should
public
pause
works
more.
versus contractual, is this then under the assumption that chipper service is occurring once per year?
Yes, correct.
Okay,
It's a
thank you.
one-a-year program.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think just wrapping up, this slide is provided by Director of Finance Gallagher. This was just to give the council a snapshot of 3 different scenarios based on a rate increase and what that would do, or what the impacts of the program if Public Works were to do it, and the costs associated that were attributed to the refuse fund. At $80,000 of funding, 100% funded out of the fund balance, you would see about a 9% decrease over 5 years in the fund balance. With a $3 per year increase in your refuse rate per year, you would see about a 7% decrease over 5 years. And then in scenario 3, at a $6 increase or 50 cent a month increase in your refuse bill, it would be about a 5% decrease over 5 years in fund balance. I believe it's in scenario 2, the fund balance, or the refuse fund would have to subsidize about 77% of the program, and in scenario 3, it would be about 50% of the program that the fund balance subsidized the brush collection program. Again, this is just a table that was provided in your packet to show you that if the increase was 50 cents, the fund balance would have to pay $44,000, and if it was 25 cents, the fund balance would have to pay $62,000, and that's if Public Works performed the work in-house. Just some items for the City Council to consider. I don't know if these are things the mayor would like to ask the council individually or just get general feedback right now. I would draw your attention to the last question, which probably should have been the first question. If the city council is interested in staff, if this is something that would get pushed to the 2021 budget as opposed to 2020, would the city council want us to look into putting a survey on the city website that had, half a dozen to 10 questions to gauge interest on whether residents would actually use the program? Would they be willing to pay for the program? I have some sample questions on the next slide, but I thought it was important to answer some of these questions first.
Alderman Bessetti?
I would rather discuss what he's already talked about before we get into these questions.
Sure.
That's
Right
fair.
here.
I mean, you're leading it with Director
So,
Warren. Sure, that's fine.
Sure, that's fine.
Mind?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, a couple of, and going through this. First off, and this is no offense to the finance people or yourself or Barry or anybody, but the cost is ridiculous. I think it's made up. Some of the things I'm wondering about, first off, equipment costs. We already own the equipment. What actual cost, what dollar is going to come out of our city because of equipment?
Yeah.
If we do it ourselves. I can see if we're contracting out, equipment cost is germane to that quote, but I don't see how it affects
Yeah.
us doing it ourselves.
And I understand that. The two things I would indicate are depreciation costs and fuel and maintenance costs. But again, as I indicated, the labor, and I understand that labor and equipment is essentially paid for. But for comparative purposes, when you're comparing it to what contractual services, you have to kind of compare apples to apples. So that's why we provided those costs, because that's what a contractor would charge you, is for labor and material, equipment costs and disposal fees. So I tried to keep it consistent.
So I just wanted to make sure that that was brought up. So the real
Sure.
cost is not 78,901. You take off the equipment cost, it goes down to 57,000. Be generous with the labor. Let's say you got $40,000 there. I don't know, say a third of it stays in there, or say 15,000 or something like that. And then disposal, which is the other thing, $17,186 to dispose of the chips. I know that we had very little time to really look at various ways to dispose of this, so all you really had was what we're currently doing to dispose of chips. I think that we could probably do more research into maybe there is somebody out there that will still take these things, or at least for some people might even pay for some. I understand they're not of a high quality grade, but to have to say that $17,000 to dispose, you know, I think you take these different things into account. The real cost of this, I don't want to say real cost, but the actual real costs of this are the secondary costs. If we incur any costs for something that is not getting done, that is essential to get done, and I think that has to do a lot with the month that we picked to do this. And then really, if we do have any type of unexpected, breakdown of equipment or whatever. But as far as depreciation of equipment and all that other stuff, it's going to depreciate whether we use it or not. The disposal costs, I think we could probably work on that. And like you said, the labor costs, it's really what is the cost of what we're not getting, what we're not doing, and if we do, during that month, do some less street sweeping and maybe a little less of different things, and we pick the appropriate month.
Sure.
I think that we could probably really cut this thing down to a third of what, or less of what this is. And so I would say I'd like to try and figure out what the real dollars are.
Yeah.
And I understand for comparison purposes, this is how it had to be presented. But I think our decision can't necessarily be made on it's going to cost our taxpayers another $78,000. So if that's the case, I mean, I don't know who would rather do chipper service or put $78,000 more into a road. So that's kind of where I was there. And then on the other thing I'd like to see is with the different scenarios on the last page there. One scenario I'd like to see is for each of those years, how much is the refuse fund going down if we do no chipper service? I mean, if we keep putting the same amount in and costs keep going up, that fund's going to keep going down regardless of whether there's a chipper service or not. So I'm curious what that is. Maybe that's already baked in there. I don't know. But, I mean, those are the first questions there. So I don't know.
Okay, so your first wish.
So I'd like to see a little bit more.
Okay. So if I get this right, your first wish is that we get tighter costs.
Yeah,
more
what
true
exactly
costs
is
to
not,
implement this.
let's, maybe we can pick a time period we want to do this, and we can narrow it down to what is not going to get done, and what's the cost of that. You know, for example, if we pick April, you know, theoretically, or we pick August, which seem to be the light periods based on the time periods that they put on here, what does that look like? I mean, what will we maybe not see done during that time period that would normally get done? That's kind of where I'm at. I'm open to other thoughts. That's just my thinking on the thing. I just think that this is a service that I'd like to see come back because you know, it's one of those. I don't want to say it's just a nice to have. It's something that we can give our residents at a relatively low cost. I mean, we tax and we do all these different things. If there's something we can do, especially for our people that are, you know, can only do so much with their yard on their own, I think it would be a very, very good thing for us to do.
Okay, so financial accuracy aside, Director Horn had put together 4 questions here. If we wanted to examine those, is there still opportunity to examine these questions without regard to the specific cost of this project or implementing a chipper service?
I think for the spirit of giving some direction regarding these questions, yes, we probably should. You know, I mean, what are people's, I'd like to hear what other councilmen's thoughts are. It's not all about what I think, so.
Sure.
It's kind of it.
Alderman Veneziano?
So I have a couple questions for Director Horn. First, when was the last time some of this equipment was used?
We use the chippers on a regular basis. We have a primary chipper and a secondary chipper anytime there's a large storm event, which I believe we used last year, the secondary chipper. But we have a primary chipper that we use, and we use that every, you know, I don't want to say every day, but very often. And the dump trucks we use are the trucks we have as snowplows. So they get used relatively, whether it's asphalt or water main repairs, sewer repairs, things like that. The equipment doesn't sit idle. It does get used.
Okay. So with going at that with the equipment cost, to say that that cost would be zero, I'm assuming is inaccurate, because we still need to fuel these trucks, which is what's entailed in that cost. Because if we're not using them for the purposes of chipping, then we're not fueling them. But my second question is there a time of year that would change the cost realistically?
I did not factor in the time of year into the cost when we were doing these equations. It was really based on the time the equipment and the men are needed to get the program completed. The big thing I thought was important from my perspective is, you know, special events and the increase in pavement patching, and finally getting the Emerald Ash Borer program out of the way and catching up with our tree trimming and tree removals. I just want the council to understand, we have a, Public Works, like all the departments here, have a very high level of expectation as far as what we provide the community, and when we don't meet those levels, you guys hear about it. I want you to understand that if we take on a 4-week program, things are going to be impacted. It's just we do too much every single month to not, you know, I certainly, as I told Alderman Bessetti today, I don't want us to be like Palatine and do our chipper program in February. That's unreasonable. It's not good to the residents. But I think any other month of the year from March to December, we are doing other programs, significant programs.
Thank you.
Alderman Stanoika.
I have two items that I would like to bring forth. I would like to focus on the last item that we have for items to consider, asking if the City Council would find it beneficial for staff to post a survey on the city website to collect information to better gauge community interest in the program. I would be for this for two important reasons. One, of the residents that have reached out to me, I've had about 3 who are all for this, and 3 is not representative of my ward nor the city as a whole. I also think that it would be important for the city to host this survey and that we can then distribute that to our residents because the validity is then with the city. We have some informal surveys that have gone out in the past for other items, and residents have questioned the validity of the popularity of a certain item because it was not necessarily from a single source. So I would be in favor of that for those reasons. The second item I wanted to bring up was currently the city collects branches provided that they are cut to a length of 4 feet or less, bundled, and weigh less than 50 pounds. Other than the 3 residents that have reached out this past week regarding this line item, I have had seniors reach out to me over the past couple of months when we've had some storms, and they were asking if there are any, and this is a question for all staff, are there any relief services for our seniors in order to be able to help clean up brush on their residential properties?
The first thing is when it comes to refuse, we do a backdoor service for elderly residents. Now, obviously, it wouldn't pertain to a lot of landscape material like you're referring to. I will tell you that I'm reading a memo right now. It was provided to me before he went on vacation from Superintendent Wenzel for a senior yard maintenance program that we're considering trying to implement that will help senior citizens or disabled people with things that end up becoming property and maintenance concerns, but that certainly could be considered as part of that program, for sure.
Director Horn, do you require additional direction from the council to explore that item?
We really just started reading about it. I mean that our staff provoked that program, so I would assume that we would probably try and vet out as much as we can. Obviously, now with this information, we'll try and incorporate that, but we'd probably bring it back to City Council to see if you're interested in providing that service. It just came to my desk, like I said, 2 weeks ago. So
I understand.
Good timing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well then. Further comments, Alderman Cannon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll answer the 4 questions. First one is resounding no. We survived quite nicely since 2011 without doing this service. 84% of the people have not used the service in the last few years, even when we did have it. So I don't want to see 84% of the people pay for something for 14%, or 16%, excuse me. I definitely don't want to have a fund balance used for part of this. And I really have no interest in doing a pilot program. I think the thing I would suggest to Mr. Horn is I think he needs to reemphasize that if we do this work in-house, we can put whatever numbers we want to them, but work still has to get done that we're not going to be doing if we're doing this trimming. So you can dice it any way you want, but if we use our chipper for how many hours, hundreds of hours, it does take a toll on the equipment. You can go talk to our guys that work in the maintenance department. They have to sharpen it, they have to tune it up, they have to change the oil. It gets worn out. That's why we have a secondary one. We paid, I think $65,000 for the one we got now.
Yeah.
We bought a high-end one that works really well. And to answer your question, Jennifer, we actually use it every day almost. Both the pieces of equipment are on my block this in the last day. So I mean, it's used quite often. So my whole point is, you know what? Right now we have about the highest garbage price as a city of any place around it because of the services we offer. And all the residents have been able to survive by wrapping their stuff that they can and get it done. Most of the cities that don't offer any collection of leaves and all that stuff have a price of their monthly service under $20. We're at $30 a month. So we're paying a lot of money right now for the service we're offering. And again, I just don't see as why we should bring something back. I'm kind of going off of what I talked about earlier. I don't want to increase cost to our city. I want to lower cost to our city. and this would just increase cost. I don't want our 4 staff people coming off tree trimming and doing other things that are important to us right now that we all agree need to be done, and have them do this for 4 or 5 weeks. And if we get even more people to use it, it's just going to take more of their time. And I'll use you one example. I talked to the staff that does this work right now. They told me about a resident that I think is even in my ward, that the last time they offered this service in 2011, one resident filled up 2 dump trucks worth of material. One resident. So my point again is, we can't do something that 84% of the people don't use to keep 16% of the people happy. I don't think that's fair to the people who don't do it. So that's my piece. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Alderman Sonoyka.
As a follow-up to Alderman Cannon's mentioning that he would not want to offset costs from the reserves of the refuse fund for a pilot program, my question is for staff in our finance department. If we were to dip into the refuse fund, how would that impact our credit rating, if any, or if at all?
So obviously, Melissa's behind.
Melissa's here. She's saving you.
Okay.
Well,
We both have the same answer, so.
and if I start coughing, I apologize. I'm still getting over my cold. Alderman Sonoyka, to your question, something like this would not per se affect your credit rating. In terms of the fund balance, this was developed in terms to make sure that we're in parameters. Right now, we're in the lower scale to that. So your question as far as if you don't, can you rephrase your question one more time for me?
So my question is, if we were to dip into reserves, since we're within parameters, it doesn't sound like that would necessarily affect our credit rating as it stands.
As long as we're staying between that 30 and 50%,
right,
they're fine with it. Once you go below the 30%, or the council decides to change that fund balance policy to make it a new policy, then they're going to have concerns.
I understand. So then in the 3 scenarios that we have before us, 1, 2, and 3, none of those scenarios would have us dip below our current lower range of fund reserves for the refuse fund.
They actually all do.
Not for 2020.
Not for 2020, but for 2021, obviously.
And that was using that estimate, that ballpark estimate that Director Horn. It's been a long day. I do apologize. And so what I was going to mention, just again, these were estimates developed on what was given to us. So at 2020, the pilot program could be done. But when you go out to those other years, that's the consideration to make sure that you're in that fund balance parameter. So if you go below that, then we're going past what the parameters are set up.
And our lowest range then is that 30%?
Correct.
That is correct.
Okay. Can we go back to the other questions that we had pulled up earlier? Sorry. Okay.
Oh, sorry, wrong one. There you go.
And then my question for the council is why we might be for or against a pilot program to determine interest in the city from our residents.
Alderman Diastis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When previously we had this service, I know many people in my ward took advantage of it. I certainly did. So I agree with Alderman Bessetti to the extent that we need to investigate. I also agree with Mr. Cannon that it's not fair that 80+% pay for 20+%. So I would think that the first thing we'd want to do is find out from the residents if there is an interest in this. And the survey. Everything else is kind of mute. I mean, if 80% of the people come back and say, yes, we want it, then we need to investigate further. If 20% say they want it, I think we kind of have an answer. Just my opinion.
Alderman Bessetti, you had your hand up earlier.
A couple of things. First one, you can't say 84%, with all respect, Mr. Cannon. It was 1 year. I can pick a different year and say it was 50%.
And we used to have money then, too.
I'm just saying, you can't just say that it's 84%.
Yeah, it was 84% the last year we had it.
Okay, regardless. I mean, these questions are all why I was saying that, we need to probably get answers on those things. I think investigating the interest. I mean, if we do a survey and it comes back that, let's say 80% of the people don't want to pay for the other 20% or whatever, fine, let's drop it. But I think there's more investigation that needs to be done. I think we need to look at what the real cost is going to be to the city and our residents, and see what the impact on the fund balance is there. I know for a fact, I can speak for myself and myself only, but paying $3 more a year, 50 cents a month more, am I able to have the option of being able to do this in a given year? I mean, that's nothing. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. So I would be in favor of some sort of a survey.
Alderman Snoyka, is this one going to be a quick question by chance?
I can wait.
Okay. What I would like to do, knowing that we would like to have tighter numbers for this, for the sake of moving the conversation and time along, the questions that you had posed in your slide, are they the same as what's in the packet here?
Yes.
I would like to do a quick roundtable and get everyone's opinions for staff so we can move on with those and then continue with any questions and then call up comments from the community. So for the first one, does City Council wish to bring the brush collection service as one-year pilot program in fiscal year 2021? Quick show of hands of those in favor. Is that it?
Just one question. Or 2020.
Okay, so then the first one is the same that I asked for the fiscal year 2020. Quick show of hands for anyone in favor of the fiscal year 2020. Alderman Bessetti, that's one. Those opposed to bringing the brush collection service as a one-year pilot program in 2020? Those opposed?
I'm sorry, is this fiscal year 2020 or calendar year 2020, so I understand?
We're in the same.
They're the same in our budget.
Tax year, we're talking about the budget that we haven't approved yet? Is that the
Yes.
question?
Yes.
Yes, right,
Okay.
right now.
The one
Fiscal
where we
year
don't
2020.
dip below the fund balance.
Right.
Yeah. Should I re-ask the question?
Would you please?
Okay. Does the City Council wish to bring the brush collection service as a one-year pilot program in fiscal year 2020? Those in favor?
Oh.
That's two. And those opposed? Okay. Now I'm going to ask the question, the same question again for fiscal year 2021, because that's how the question's written here. Does the City Council wish to bring the brush collection service as a one-year pilot program in fiscal year 2021? All those in favor? 3. Those opposed? 3. Wonderful. Next question. If the city begins a pilot program, does the City Council wish to pay for the program with fund balance reserves for fiscal year 2021? All those in favor, using fund reserves, the balance reserves. Those in favor?
A question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
In all of the examples that were shown, there was a fund, we would be using reserves to pay, whether we charge $3 or $6, we would still be dipping into the reserve. So would it not be prudent to say, should we do a survey first and find out if people want this before we try to figure out all these other questions?
I guess, but the chronology of the questions doesn't go that order. So, I mean,
That was entirely my fault. As soon as I read it, I said I should have put the survey up front, because I understand if the survey is your desire to pursue the survey, obviously that helps in your decision-making. So I would be happy with just answering that question.
Okay.
And
that's
I didn't want to interrupt you.
Let's go ahead and ask that one question.
Yes.
Is the council in favor of putting a survey out to residents to take the temperature of the willingness or want of residents to receive this service? All those in favor? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? 1. Okay. So is that a sufficient question for you?
Yeah, that is fine for me. The one clarification I would just make is, would the council like us maybe in a staff report to show you the draft questions?
Yes.
Yes.
As part of a council meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Then I have nothing further.
Wonderful. At this time, I'm going to look at the sign-in sheet. If there aren't any further questions from the council at this moment, it seems we have...
I had one, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman
Sorry.
Sonoyka. That's
I know it's
okay.
late. I just wanted to see if we can concurrently look for additional bids for this service at this time, or if it is prudent to wait for a survey and continue to gauge interest.
Yes, my only request would be, I would prefer that staff not pursue proposals and other items if the city council's not in favor. Based on the 2 votes I saw earlier, it was not. It was a 2-4 against and a 3-3 tie. So I guess if we could just wait until we find some directive as to where, because again, disposal costs, we will investigate that as well. Certainly, we want to save as much money as possible, so we would look to get a better price on disposal costs as well. But I just prefer to find out council direction before running off doing all these things, if that's okay.
Understood. Thank you.
Sure.
Wonderful. Steve Hollish. You can wait next time. He'll speak and then...
Good evening. It's going to be a long night for you guys. I guess when I've come forward to this, I've listened to other city council meetings, other community of the whole meetings, where you've come up with small expenditures that the city has to approve for, in my mind, unnecessary vehicles, unnecessary communication equipment, and now you're coming up and saying, gee, let's have a chipper. Well, you know what? I had a chipper way back when, and I used it, and it was a good service. But you know what? When it went away, I found other ways to do it. Tied up the bundles, the city came and got it. No cost to me, no extra stress. Big argument tonight was budgets and lowering costs to the city. This is a prime example of how to lower the cost to the city. Don't invest in a new chipper. Don't do this chipper program. It's just more money and more aggravation. So you ought to look at things to reduce, like, less community events if you're forecasting 20 next year. Why do we need 20? You want to do surveys? See how many people show up to those. Out of 24,000 people? I don't know, not many. A 5-mile square city doesn't need this kind of activity. You ought to start looking at how to do things better and stop trying to nickel and dime the residents to death by unnecessary programs and expenditures. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further questions or comments from the council? Alderman Bessetti?
The only thing I wanted to bring up is I don't know that there would be a problem with at least looking into the disposal costs while we're, and do that at the same time with the
I think Director Horton had a pretty good logical approach to this, and we'll just wait till we gauge resident sentiment, desire, and then we can put those other components in place.
Okay.
If that's fair. Moving forward now, next item. Something less contentious here. G1 ordinance. How's that sound, Barry?
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Gallo. And obviously before you is another discussion on the G1. I do want to reiterate a few things in the packet if no one has looked at the packet. But from the September 24th special council meeting, we did have 3 resolutions to some of the discussion. A hood is needed for new and old establishments. Only 3 video gaming establishments would be allowed in a half-mile radius. For new establishments, there would be a 1-year waiting period for time that open, then when they would be allowed to activate the video gaming in the institutions. The other thing that you'll see is that I pulled some information from on Prospect that was after us about that 1-year wait if you want to do it. City Attorney actually drafted, Melissa Wolf drafted a wording that could be in a new ordinance at this point in time. This is not with any of the additional information that we have. I would make the one caveat in the draft wording. Sorry, this was after the fact, but City Attorney Wolf would actually revise part of this other thing as mentioned by City Manager. We would work on some of that at that point in time. But obviously, open items that are still need to be discussed or put to bed, if you would like to consider it that, is that are we creating a new liquor license that would allow video gaming in a cigar store, video gaming in a hotel motel, video gaming in a liquor store, video gaming in a banquet hall. The A3 discussion was not resolved. Would it still be allowed for video gaming? And then obviously, there's a transferability of licenses. And then the final one that I do want to reiterate is the grandfathering of the 3 locations that I've mentioned before, that they're in the process of final construction, permit process. They've talked to us, and obviously Melissa's here behind me, and she actually represents Lulu's. So that's why she obviously signed on the document. I would tell you that when we started off this venture about a year ago, we went to her location, Sweet Melissa, which is actually in DuPage County. But again, it does have the grill and hood that's in the overall. And obviously from the last meeting, we were asked about rates for our liquor licenses, some additional footprints or additional discussions that have happened, and then obviously that draft where we resolve some of the other comments from the last time. So with that, that's my really quick summary of what's behind in front of you.
Opening it up to the floor, Alderman Bessetti.
Since we've already beat this thing to death, can we just take those questions in reverse order and do the straw vote now? Because I don't believe there's any more discussion that needs to happen on any of these things.
Alderman Sonoyka.
Looking at number 1 regarding a hood is needed for new or old establishments or restaurants, I have an or for number 1 versus an and. Is this just because it's an old version of the packet?
No.
Okay.
It's meant to be and.
Okay. The follow-up to that is, I was under the impression that our last special meeting, we had decided that the hood is not in and of itself going to define whether or not an establishment is fulfilling the spirit of the ordinance, and that we had instead looked at other signifiers such as revenue percentages for an establishment, and also installing a waiting period to determine whether or not the integrity of the establishment was for food and beverage or other business, without gambling being the primary purpose. And
continue.
yeah, so I would like clarification from staff on that particular summary item.
So the hood was the final determination from when we had the conversation, reiterated a few times, and all revenue sharing or looking at that was actually removed from any discussion at that point in time. And again, it went back to the new establishments would be the 1-year waiting period, eliminated any of those look-backs or any of those kind of things. But what you have is 1, 2, and 3. Those were what were reiterated in the final decisions and discussions from September 24th.
Did we also decide if there would be any difference between new and old establishments when we did that straw vote, to see if there would be any? I have here the grandfathered in of these. I'm looking at our page for, I see, so this is an open item as far as whether we would grandfather in other locations.
Yeah, when you look at the open items, that's where, from that discussion.
Further comments, discussion?
Yeah, to Alderman Sonoyka's point, I see we're talking about grandfathering in 3 establishments that don't exist yet. So I don't understand why when we talked about this, we talked about the existing, that we knew about the existing places, and that we were trying to legislate against new places coming in that wouldn't meet the restaurant criteria. And so now we have 3 different places we don't know anything about. We don't know anything about their menu or anything about them, but you're asking us to grandfather them in all because they have a hood, which we already determined wasn't necessarily successful in keeping out gaming parlors already. So I don't understand why the 1-year waiting period would not apply for these new places, seeing that they already don't have, they still don't have an alcohol license at this point, and they're not in operation. So we know nothing about their operation other than what we're going to be told, and we've been told in other instances what those were going to be, and then found out what they turned into after the fact. So I'm not for grandfathering 3 locations that don't exist yet. If we're not going to have some other way of knowing what their model is going to be other than that they have a hood. Because we were already told at the last council whole meeting that there are businesses willing to pay for a hood just to get their gaming machines in, and that the most effective way that they found was to have the businesses wait for a year. So I don't understand why we have 3 new people come in, we don't have them wait at all.
So I would make the comment that the city council has already approved a liquor license for Sally's, not the G1. They're the ones that are closest to finishing their final construction. Staff has looked at the menu and the other pieces. Shelby's and Lulu's, again, they have talked to the staff. They were in the process at this point in time, and obviously with Melissa standing in the back or sitting in the back, and she is signed up. They've gone through the process. They have no final permit. They do not have a liquor license, but Sally's does have a liquor license. They do not have the G1 license at that point in time.
And are they open?
They're really close to it. I know that Alderman Cannon has actually stopped by, and I've been there a few times, obviously, but
We were discussing, though, those that were in current operation, and then that the G1 is a privilege in addition to the liquor license. So I think we should just keep the context of the grandfathering being to those that are actively in business, open for business, and have both the liquor license and the privileged G1. Anything that does not have that criteria met shouldn't be included into this category.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Cannon.
So I'm a little bit confused. So, Sally's is literally built out almost.
Okay.
I mean, they're working under the assumption that they're going to get all the things they needed. I can't speak to Shelby's or Lulu's because just I don't know. But I mean, if you go into Sally's, I mean, you can go in the window. They got walls built. They're almost ready to go. I mean, for us to go back and say to them now they can't do it. I don't know what verbiage you'd want to use to go along with that, but I think that would be reneging on a promise that we've kind of insinuated that we made to them. I mean, we've led them believe that they could get everything that they need, and now to say we're not going to give them the license, I don't think they would have opened up a restaurant only. They own the shopping center, and they're in the food business right now with successful locations at, correct me if I'm wrong, Barry, 3 other locations they have? Mm-hmm. So they're a successful restaurant operator. Mm-hmm. They came to us and followed all the instructions that they were supposed to, and they're building it out right now.
And the spirit of our G1 was to help restaurants in the community, and so they should be a restaurant first and foremost. And I do understand that there is going to be some ancillary profit associated with the G1 license, but when we were at the committee of the whole, the special committee of the whole meeting, I don't recall you being there. But we did talk about the restaurants that were currently in operation being grandfathered in, and I know there was conversation about those in the pipeline. But again, those in the pipeline are not those that are currently active and operating with the G1 that would fit under a grandfather clause or type clause. Alderman Veneziano, you had your hand up.
So to kind of rebut what Alderman Cannon is saying is we have a business that has applied multiple times for a G1 license, an established business in our community for 5 years that cannot get their G1 license because they were enforced on a rule that wasn't a rule, and now we're kind of arguing over grandfathering a business that's not even open yet.
But just so you know, they already have a G1 license at their present location out of the part of town.
But that doesn't guarantee.
Sally's,
well, no, I know, but
Sally's doesn't. The Apostles do not have a G1. That would go back to
I thought
Banquet.
Meridian had one.
My point to that is that each location is separate, and it's a privilege. We established that, that it's a privilege, not a guarantee, is the point I'm trying to make.
Alderman Diastis?
Thank you. I wasn't at that meeting, but I watched it, and I had lengthy discussion with Alderman O'Brien, who's not here, and my takeaway was that council's, that the decision was these three, Sally, Shelby, and Lulu's, don't have to wait a year, and when I talked to Alderman O'Brien, he was of the same opinion. So it sounds like we're going to start going around in circles once again. I'm fine with these three getting it because of where they are in their process.
Okay. Further comments from the council?
I never heard the word Lulu's before tonight.
No.
It's all new.
Alderman Budmetz, actually, if you remember when we were talking about the three within a mile, that's when I did mention, not by name, but that location was right by Senior Taco, but that was when we were talking about that.
And I do think the operative word is operational. And though, unfortunately, they're not operational at this time or that time, this is where we are right now in the conversation. Alderman Budmetz?
And so the most important thing is that this was about helping our restaurants, and for me to hear that I don't know if they're going to want to operate as restaurants unless they have gaming, that means they're not restaurants. That means they're gaming facilities looking to open up as a restaurant. So if it's a restaurant, it's a restaurant, and they're going to make it whether they have machines or not. And so are we here to help restaurants, or are we here to open up gaming facilities? Which is it?
And I know their neighbor, who's a restaurant, is operating well and seating patrons without gaming. Alderman Diastis.
I believe the G1 went into effect as an economic development stimulus tool to help restaurants and existing and to fill vacancies within the city. And that's exactly what this is doing. So twist it however we want. There's three that are coming here because of that. They followed all the rules. They're willing to they're putting in commercial kitchens, and they're going to be doing this. Now, we change rules midstream once again. Obviously, what I saw and what I talked to Mr. O'Brien about are certainly different than what is being discussed at this point in time.
And in the spirit of talking about economic development or drivers of economic development, and this privilege being one of those drivers, the Economic Development Committee did approach me with concern about the ubiquity or potential possibility to opening up our community with many gaming parlors. And I feel if this establishment is going to be reluctant or have reservations to open as a restaurant, if they don't get their other component, which is gaming, then they are more concerned about gaming than they are with being a restaurant and serving our residents in our community. Alderman Cannon.
Mr. Mayor, I would just respectfully disagree with you. I mean, when you have a person who's going to come in and start a business, no matter whether it's a restaurant, a video gaming thing, or any other store, they try to put together a scenario how they're going to make money to stay open. A restaurant particularly has a hard time the first year, no matter where it's located. So I'm guessing, again, I won't speak for the other two because I just don't know anything about them. But, the Sally's location has been vacant, I believe, 6 years. It's been sitting there empty. Yes. And I'm sure when they put together their financial plan, because they operate and they have video gaming in other cities, but also have full-service restaurants, sit-down banquet, steakhouse in one case, and another one where they have fast food and gaming. They're obviously successful at it. They have a big operation in Rolling Meadows already. They are a restaurant company. And I'm sure when they put together the scenario that they were doing, when they were going to go after this particular location, video gaming was probably part of their financial program to make the location viable, to spend the money to build it out and to make it operational. So that's just my take on it. Thank you for listening.
You're welcome. I don't disagree that they do not have a business plan that does have some facet or component that outlines the revenue recognized from having 6 gaming terminals. Nobody's arguing that. But that is not the spirit of the G1 in its essence. It was to assist our restaurants who came up here, letting us as a council know that they were losing business and patrons to other communities who afforded video gaming. So in that spirit, we decided to allow restaurants, those that had liquor licenses A1 through 3, entertain the idea of obtaining a G1. That was the spirit of this.
And I'm a little confused because we revisited this because a bar came to us, an existing business in our town came to us and said, we want to have machines, and people were like, no, if you don't have a hood, you're not a real restaurant. But now we have people who don't even have a real restaurant that we're worried about preserving their right to open up G1 gaming licenses. I'm trying to understand how this has evolved, because we had a business who were kind of pushing away and saying, hey, we got other friends we want to bring into this. This doesn't make sense to me at all.
Mind you, that other business is actually actively currently losing patrons to other businesses inside our community that have opened up after the fact, because they offer those other components to their business plan, which we're declining this pre-existing business from getting. So we as a council are being contradictory, yeah, absolutely, but we have to fix that.
Which is why we reopen this.
Correct.
To review it and make sure that it reflected what we were trying to do as a community.
Further comments?
I would like to take a look at the wording that was provided in the packet from the Village of Mount Prospect. And specifically, this language mentions the 1-year requirement is satisfied if an otherwise eligible establishment is acquired by a new owner that operates qualified video gaming in other locations in the state of Illinois. And this to me sounds like a situation that we had attempted to avoid in previous conversations. Would this wording essentially allow another established gaming parlor in another city within the state of Illinois to be able to buy an existing establishment and then acquire that G1 license where it would be transferable?
This proposed language that currently exists in the Village of Mount Prospect, I think, allows for an opportunity to waive the 1-year requirement for those, or satisfy that without actually waiting the entire year in the village. If they aren't otherwise, if they're an establishment that operates a qualified video gaming in other locations in the state. I believe the purpose of that is to give the municipality the opportunity to evaluate locations that already exist by that particular owner to determine what kind of operation they actually have up and running in other areas. And then the city can waive, or the municipality would count that 1-year requirement as having been accomplished.
Okay. So then, question for council on whether or not we would consider transferability to be an option for businesses in the city of Rolling Meadows.
Alderman Veneziano.
Question for Attorney Wolf. If we had, like we had originally talked about at that special meeting, that one of our line items would be that if a business had sold, that the entity, the G1 would not transfer with the sale, that they would have to reapply for that G1. Would that supersede this line item in this part of the language?
The line item that you're talking about being
that Alderman Sonoyka is asking
the
about.
Mount Prospect sample language?
Correct.
No, this language in the Mount Prospect ordinance does not implicate transferability of a license. What this language does is allow the municipality to waive the 1-year operational requirement if the proposed owner has an establishment that already, that's an eligible establishment that has gaming and another use, let's say, for instance, a restaurant, so that the Village of Mount Prospect can evaluate what kind of operation they'd be running, and they won't require then the 1-year operation within their own village. So this allows the village to waive that requirement. It doesn't deal with transferability of a license.
So they're two separate items. Thank you.
Alderman Bessetti.
I mean, the one thing that and I think everybody knows this, but the language that's in there from Mount Prospect isn't necessarily our proposal. We changed that language to not have that clause in there about being able, because frankly, if, just because they have something in another town, I don't think there's any reason to ever waive that, and I don't want to have the option available to play favorites, and that's exactly what it would be. So with that said, I mean, I think some of the other questions are fairly easy. We could probably knock those off pretty quickly, like the transferability. I think pretty much everybody might have an idea based on what I'm sensing.
Alderman Sonoyka.
Could the chair please clarify Alderman Bessetti's position on transferability? He said, Alderman Bessetti stated that he believes that most people have an idea of what they would like the transferability to look like for this particular ordinance. Request for Alderman Bessetti to clarify what he would like to put forth for the council to consider regarding transferability of licenses for the G1.
Okay. I would like to have a straw vote that said that on whether or not licenses would be transferable, period.
To satisfy Alderman Bessetti's request, could I see a quick show of hands of those in favor of seeing whether or not license would be non-transferable?
You can say it whichever way, it just changes the vote.
Those in favor of licenses being non-transferable? All those in favor? Those opposed to being non-transferable? One.
Thank you.
There's one for you.
Do we want to discuss the other open items of video gaming in hotels and liquor stores? Alderman Bessetti.
I think the first one we need to go at is the A3. Because I think once we have consensus on whatever that is, I think that's going to lead us to the answers on some of these other ones. Because that really it goes to the intent of what we're, in my view, of what we're looking at.
And this is to recognize whether or not a licensee of an A3 license should be allowed to apply for a G1? Is that the question?
That's exactly the question. And you're basically saying, can any bar with a hood be able to have one? Where they serve?
I need to ask council if we can, are we allowed to discriminate license levels and just say that the G1 is specifically for A1 and A2 and not A3 or whatever? Are we?
The council can make that decision.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, then let's start there with a quick show of hands. Those in favor of removing A3, license A3, from being able to obtain a G1, are you in favor of removing an A3 liquor license from receiving a G1? Show your hands if you are in favor of removing the A3 liquor license from getting a G1.
By definition, they're not restaurants.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Sonoyka.
I want to reiterate for those that could not be here for the special meeting that if we remove A3, then we cannot consider any A3 opportunities. This is not the current ordinance that allows for A3 is allowing establishments that have an A3 to be considered. This does not mean that they would get it. And since we only have one establishment in the city of Rolling Meadows that with an A3, then this is a single case basis, and we would not have the opportunity to evaluate other cases that might have a slightly different business model that still meets the spirit of the original ordinance or the ordinance that we're trying to create at this time.
So your rebuttal to this vote is that because the G1 is in and of itself a privilege and is not guaranteed, that there's really no reason to discuss whether or not we should remove an A3 from being able to apply for a G1.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
The only other thought I would put on that, is I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but the only other thought I would put on there, A and A3 is not a restaurant. By definition, it's not a restaurant. And two, it's my understanding that if they are a restaurant, an A2 license is less expensive. So why would somebody get an A3 license if they're going to be a restaurant? That's my only thinking there.
Well, the only way to solve that right now is with a straw vote, and just those who want to remove A3s from being able to apply for a G1, please show your hand if you're in favor of removing A3.
Okay. But I mean, an A3, if they wanted to upgrade, they could apply for a G1 if they wanted to upgrade their equipment.
Sure. Yeah.
But your question kind of says they can't do that. Am I reading you wrong? Maybe I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, but you're insinuating they can't upgrade their, so if a guy is an A3 right now, and they want to make the investment to make themselves a G1, you're saying they can't do that then?
No, they can.
Well, I'm asking a question. I'm not saying, I'm not.
With the license that they currently hold as an A3, no, they couldn't make the upgrades, but what they could do is reclassify with the city potentially as an A2, and then go ahead and apply for a G1. I think, in my opinion, I think this is a ridiculous approach, but that's my opinion. I don't know that there's any value in this because a G1 is purely a privilege. And if an A3 wanted to apply, they would come before the council, and if the council didn't see fit that they received this privilege, they would vote them down. So we're not, this is an arbitrary, irrelevant exercise. But to cater to your request, I'm doing it. And if anybody did have an A3 and they wanted to pursue a G1, they would change their liquor license from A3 to A2, whatever criteria they had to meet, and so meet it.
Okay, great. Thanks for the answer.
So do we still want to vote whether or not we should allow the privilege for an A3 to pursue a G1?
Yes.
Okay. So the quick show of hands, those who want to limit A3s from receiving a G1 application, all those in favor? 2. All those opposed? 3. All those opposed? That's 3. Stalemate here for that, and it's
So
committee of the whole.
at this point, there's no majority that would necessitate a change from the language to remove the A3 at this time.
Correct.
So now that's resolved.
Okay. So moving on, back up at the top, discussing video gaming in hotels and motels. Is there any discussion on this open item? Alderman Diaz.
Thank you, sir. In a hotel, motel, restaurant?
Yes, the restaurants that have a liquor license and they serve food and the patrons sit down and eat.
Again, that's kind of my bailiwick, and I would say I wouldn't have a problem if there was a hotel restaurant that wanted to cut space and follow the rest of the rules. I don't see any reason why they couldn't or we shouldn't allow that. I mean, it would only make sense. It's not like it's a casino. They're going to put in 5 machines if they 6 if they so desire. I mean, we should give them the option if they want to.
So I'd like to hear either with a quick show of hands or comments.
Question, do we have any hotels presently with liquor license and restaurants that are open?
No.
So then this is moot, right?
At this point.
At this point.
At this date, at this point, yes.
I mean, we're back to an A3, though, a conversation, right? It doesn't exist. We're talking about what if they show up?
So we can check it off the list and move on to the next line item?
Well, but, Mr. Mayor, don't we have a potential customer of that on Algonquin?
Yeah, and yes, and this is exactly why we had the special meeting, because this isn't for one entity or one establishment, this conversation. This is for the citywide and the future of this G1 to be thoroughly discussed and vetted so we don't trip over ourselves going forward. And that it's not just for today. It's not for one business.
No, I understand it. That's my point.
Bigger picture. Yes.
I mean, they were an existing hotel,
Correct.
restaurant in the remodeling right now.
Sure.
I would just like them to have the opportunity to do it, but that's not, who knows whether they'll do it or not.
Right.
But what you're saying is they can't.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Okay.
We're just saying that there aren't
No,
any now, right?
I agree that there's not any at the moment, but it's a little naive to think that they're not going to try to reopen as a restaurant.
Exactly. And that's why this conversation, we had a very special meeting on a special day of the 27th of September to discuss these things so we could put these mechanisms in place for the future. If they come back or if new establishments open, we would be prepared.
So, thank you, sir. I guess I'm not following the logic. And I don't follow the logic, number one. Number two, how are you defining this? Because there are many hotels that have attached restaurants that are not part of the hotel, but they're attached to the hotel. And I've worked in hotels that have restaurants inside the hotels that are not affiliated with the hotel. So are we saying none of this? I mean, so if there's a restaurant that's in a hotel that's not affiliated, can they apply for one?
So what I'm saying is, well, some of us were focused specifically on an A3 at a time. I brought up the fact that there are hotels that are operating right now, maybe on hold for a moment or two, but that do have a liquor license and that do serve food in a restaurant-like environment, and that we should be discussing this as a city so that comprehensively we have our act together should they come to us and apply for a G1. That's what I'm saying. And that's where I brought it to. Now it's up to the council to figure out what they want to do with it.
Okay.
Alderman Veneziano.
So my opinion on it is I would prefer to have it in there to give the council the opportunity to make that decision if and when a hotel comes forth to do their build out, whatever, and then they can present to us, is there a restaurant attached? Are they XYZ? That's on them to present to us. But if we don't include it, then they can't even apply. We're back to the A3, again, conversation. So to decide, we need to have, verbatim what kind of hotel, what kind of restaurant, I don't think that's necessary. That's on them to present to us and decide at that point.
And so as a council, that's what I'm looking to hear, that either we can cross that bridge when we get there, we're cognizant of and recognize it may exist, but right now it's a moot point because, again, it's an A3. It's not here where there's only one.
Yeah,
Alderman Bessetti.
I would second what Alderman Veneziano said. I think we should put every possible scenario we can think of right now in the ordinance right now, whether we have that scenario in our town or not. Just as you said, Mr. Mayor, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We could be approached. Do we want laundromats to have them? Do we want car washes to have them? We could be approached. So I'd like to just put that in there, and the more we can actually put in the ordinance on what is allowed or prohibited, it takes the, how do we say it, the arbitrary part of it out of it.
And the scramble when we are presented with it. Alderman Sonoyka.
So with that, if the council then can look to page 19 of your packet, we have the draft ordinance wording before us. Does hotels and motels that have a Class A1, A2, A3, or Class D liquor license then qualify under the current wording if a hotel were to approach us? What issues would we anticipate?
So when exploring this, I did discuss this with the city manager and did go through kind of a site visit from other hotel establishments, and they all have large industrial commercial kitchens. And so there wouldn't be any criteria that they didn't meet or exceed in spades here for this. And the question largely becomes, is this the type of environment we as a city council want to reflect based on the opinions of our residents, right? It was told to me by the Economic Development Committee that we as a community did not want to have a community that had gas stations with video gaming terminals in it. That's not what our residents want. That's not what the Economic Development Committee wanted, right? And so the question becomes, is this something reflective positively by our residents? Would they be in favor of our local hotels that have restaurants either attached or operating within them to be an establishment that has a little corner room with 6 terminals at this time?
So then, as a follow-up, for an ordinance drafting, for the purpose of drafting our ordinance, is our question then, do we want to include language that specifically prohibits hotels that meet the criteria otherwise? Is that a fair assessment?
To prohibit hotels that meet this?
Yes, well, as it's written, if we have hotels that have built-out kitchens and that have been operating for more than a year, then they would meet the current draft ordinance wording on page 19. So if we're fine with that, then there's no change that needs to be made. If we do not want to allow for hotels or banquet halls to be considered for a G1 license, then we would need to include that in the draft ordinance wording, correct?
Correct, and that's where the open items when it comes to allowing video games in hotel, motel. If we are not in favor of it, then we have to include some language that indicates that if you're in reach of so many shared bed spaces, right, then you cannot apply for a G1 because you're a restaurant that's so close to beds, and we don't want to have gaming in hotels, right? We would have put some sort of language like that, some mechanism to prevent them from applying. But if we're in favor, then there's nothing we have to do at this time because they meet the criteria as a restaurant. Because it'll be the hotel kitchen or hotel restaurant that is the applicant for the G1. Alderman Veneziano?
Kind of off topic. I feel like as a council, we are still really far off on getting the ordinance right on this G1. I'm proposing that we do another special meeting just for this G1 to go over all these topics. We still have another 2 agenda items. That's kind of my proposal. Because I don't want to just make rash decisions because of time.
I agree and I disagree. I would like to put this to rest.
I totally agree, but I feel like some of these items need a lot more discussion than maybe time allowed tonight.
I would say that if we had a quick show of hands, those in favor of allowing a hotel that has a kitchen that operates as a restaurant in favor of having video games, if you can quick show of hands, then we can cross that off the list.
Before we make that vote, can I seek some information for clarification? This gaming license has to be linked with a liquor ordinance. A liquor license, I'm sorry, thank you. So for a hotel motel, do we have any hotels or motels that have a liquor license? And let me ask you that first, Barry.
If I remember correctly, the Holiday Inn Express still has a current active liquor license. The one that we're talking about, Holiday Inn, and with the restaurant in the front, that was surrendered back to the city.
So they don't?
They're under construction.
Okay.
They're rebuilding.
When
Okay,
Aloft Hotel comes back in, that's what we're talking about,
Okay.
that they might.
And what liquor license will they have? Will they have an A1 license? Do you know what class they would fall under?
I think it is A1, but on the top of my head, I don't remember which one
Okay.
Holiday Inn Express has.
So it's one of these listed categories here. Okay. So then when the council makes its vote, if the vote would be to prohibit a hotel or motel, because as written, they would fall under one of these liquor licenses.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And so those in favor of having a hotel or motel receive a liquor license, show of hands, or prohibit.
Well, which one?
Wait.
Which one?
Let's go with prohibit.
Okay.
Let's go with prohibit. A quick show of hands to prohibit a hotel or motel with a liquor license to get a G1. Those in favor?
To prohibit.
No. In favor of allowing it.
Oh,
allowing it.
okay.
Allowing.
Allow.
Yes.
Allowing.
Allow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes.
Okay. So from a drafting perspective, no changes have to be made for that specific provision.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay.
So let's just
Yeah.
go down these lists.
Exactly.
Just do the same vote.
Check it off, right?
Do we
All
prohibit
right.
a liquor
Allowing
store?
19 go.
prohibit video gaming in a liquor store. Those in favor?
Now, I have that same question. So my reading of the classes that are allowed to
Liquor
have a
store is
liquor
not.
license, it is.
Liquor is
store?
not in the A1, A2, A3, or
Or
the
D.
D. That's
Okay,
correct.
So as written,
You don't need-
the ordinance does not allow for a liquor store to also get a G1 license. So as you vote, you can
You don't have
consider
to.
that.
They don't meet the criteria, but would we as a council in the future entertain that application? That's kind of what.
You
where
can make that
we're at.
decision, correct, right.
The thing is,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, what if there's a liquor store that all of a sudden decides, hey, I'm going to sell liquor, but I'm going to take this corner of my store to do a little bit of food. Hey, I got a hood. I want to change to an A3 or whatever. I want my G1.
Alderman Diastis.
Thank you. I don't
Would they
think,
still be a liquor store?
I don't think a liquor store, can they get 2 licenses? I don't know. I think,
They could probably subdivide the area and then make the restaurant. And again, these are all questions as we're trying to clarify. So if someone knocks on the door, are
Right.
you comfortable or not comfortable?
as a liquor store, they can't get it. They can put in a hood, they can put in a restaurant, but they still don't have an A1, A2, A3, or D. That's not what a liquor store license is. So they would have to get, and I don't know if they can get 2 licenses.
So let's play what if. Let's say you have a gas station who sells packaged goods and decides to put in a pizza oven. So now what is he? Is he a restaurant? Is he a gas station? Is he a liquor store?
He's number one, he's got to be an A1, A2, A3, or a D.
All of these require consumption on the premises also, all of these licenses.
Okay.
So Class A, 1, 2, 3, and D require consumption on premises.
Alderman Budmetz, what I would just reiterate is by state statute, gasoline stations have to be a certain acreage before they're even eligible to go in there. So your question, again, there is an establishment that has asked, and they do not have the acreage at this point in time to be even considered by the Illinois Gaming Association.
But they could, in theory, take a portion of their building, lease it to a restaurant, and then that restaurant, of course, could apply.
It's still within the acreage requirement because of the gas station. So again, if they purchased more property and got that acreage out, then they could do what you would be talking about.
Okay, so just quick show of hands, those in favor to allow video gaming in a liquor store? Those in favor? Those opposed? 6 opposed. Thank you.
Okay, so no changes need to be made to the draft ordinance on that issue then? Correct. Based on that vote?
Moving on, allow video gaming in a banquet hall. This was brought to my attention because I heard that this is a potential marketing tactic. We can host your wedding and some of your guests can go ahead and go in the other room and put some dollars in a video gaming terminal. And they do hold a liquor license, they do serve food and beverage.
Yeah, I think a banquet hall probably holds an A1 because it's consumption and dancing on premises.
Yes.
So, right? So,
I guess the question would be, should it be prohibited?
Correct. So I'm about to ask the question, should banquet halls be prohibited? Alderman Diaz.
thank you. So, again, it's kind of in my bailiwick. So if a banquet hall, ABC banquet hall, has a banquet going on Saturday night, then there is that possibility. But what if Banquet Hall ABC has nothing going on? Can they open it up just to the video gaming? Because if they have nothing going on, chances are the restaurant is not in operation because they've got to bring a staff in just to do it. It's not like a restaurant where you've got your staff there, or a hotel. It's a banquet hall, it's a shell, it's got the kitchen, it's got the bar, it's got all the stuff, but if there's not a banquet going on, can they open the doors and say, can we come in and do this?
So the caveat would be to include language that says that in order for the gaming terminals to be in operation, the kitchen must be functioning, type of thing. In order to circumvent the ability for a banquet hall to just allow patrons to come in and play the devices, well, there's nothing going on in the banquet rooms or kitchens. So that would be the language we would use. That mechanism is that the kitchen must be operational at the time patrons are using the gaming terminals. Something like that, I would imagine. Alderman Bessetti.
So then what about the establishments that already have gaming right now, but shut down their kitchens before they close?
And we discussed that at the special meeting last time.
But we never got resolution on that, did we?
No, but I was bitter about that because now I feel like they're not a genuine restaurant if they do close their kitchen and specifically cater to gaming and drinking, because now it's not a restaurant. Alderman Diastis.
Thank you, sir. Back to the banquet hall, and then I'll touch on yours for a second, if I might. I would say there needs to be a banquet taking place if they need to have the machines on. Otherwise, you could bring somebody in and turn on the grill and not serve anything. So I don't think we want that. That's my opinion. And as far as the other, most restaurants will shut down their kitchen about an hour before they close so they can start to clean up. So you can't go into a restaurant, he might be open till 12, but they stop serving at 11. So
yeah, that's not the issue.
Okay.
Manager Krumstock.
Can I just ask for one clarification? I know that we keep on saying a banquet, but at least the main one that we're talking about, they do have showcases and other conferences. So I just want that clarified. So sometimes when they have items going on in their building, it might not be with, maybe they've already done the cooking, or maybe they've turned that off. So if they're open, they're open. If they're not, they're not. So just clarification.
Correct, and I was going to mention that during the day, there are other events, trade organizations come in, CPEs for accountants, that's coming up. So it would just require some mechanism in writing to paint parameters around the use, and then they might come back, because I don't know terminals and their operations, but they say the state turns them on, so I don't control that. So they might be on even though nobody's in the kitchen, that's why,
So typically, once they're programmed on and off. So it's not Monday and Wednesday, you have this time, they're just programmed all the time. So if you don't have something in there, the understanding with a banquet hall would have to be, if you do not have an event, then you have to either close that door or make sure that no one's just walking in.
So do we use something like, if you are a banquet hall with 6 machines, you have to have a lockable door that must be locked when you're not entertaining your core business.
Mm-hmm. That's probably the end.
Okay. All right.
Isn't it also, Mr. Mayor, you're supposed to have an employee in sight lines of it all the time?
Yep, you're supposed to be.
So I mean, that should be included because a banquet hall is an awfully big place.
Sure. Okay. We've belabored that one, but we're good on it, right? We took the vote. I don't even remember if we took the vote on it.
Not on banquet halls.
So all in favor of prohibiting banquet halls?
Prohibiting banquet halls.
Prohibiting banquet halls. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed?
Opposed to prohibiting?
Yes. 1, 2. I know it's kind of oxymoronic or contradictory, but opposed to prohibiting.
Okay.
Yes. All right, moving down the list.
Can you go back up?
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, we missed the top one.
No.
Yeah, so cigar shops, right? Cigars and brandy and all that fun stuff. I was buying a cigar for a gift and was approached by the woman who asked, how do we get one of these gambling licenses? And I said, that's a good question. You have to have a liquor license first. And primarily it's in place for our restaurants, and you're not a restaurant. And she said, yeah, but we sit around here all day and watch screens. Why not watch a screen that they can gamble on? I said, I'll bring it up at the special meeting. And so here we are now after the special meeting. Any thoughts on Alderman Diaz's?
Much as I like to indulge in a cigar, and I know the mayor and I have had one, I don't think that's it at all what the intent was for this. So I would be voting no on that one. Sorry.
That's what I'm looking to hear. Feedback, pro
Just
or against?
More as a devil's advocate, what's the difference between a cigar lounge and just a place that serves beer?
A beer lounge?
Yeah, a beer lounge. To me, there's no difference between the two, other than the liquor license.
Alderman Sonoyka?
It's a A3 license. So if you're a cigar shop, then we would have to change the current draft ordinance wording in order to be able to allow for a store that doesn't have that liquor license.
Yes, I know.
That's the difference.
And then their next question is, well, can I get a liquor license? And they said cognac and cigars go well, and brandy. And I said, I don't know that. We can pursue that. So it would be up to them to try and request a liquor license, and we take that from there.
It's close to the
The other thing, Mr.
A3.
Mayor, I mean, if they have to qualify as a restaurant. So if they've met all the state requirements for opening as a restaurant, then they could revisit it. But until that point, I don't think we even have to consider it.
Yeah, like I said, I'm looking for feedback
yeah,
your
that's-
direction.
that's my
So
opinion.
that's what I'm looking for. Alderman
Excuse me.
Bessetti and then Sonoyka.
We've already voted that you don't have to be a restaurant by allowing the A3. All you have to do is have a hood, period.
I thought A3 included light food.
But it's not.
Optional.
Yeah.
Alderman Sonoyka and then Alderman Veneziano.
I just wanted to voice my support for not changing the draft ordinance to accommodate for a cigar store and to encourage them to apply for an A3 or A1 or A2 or a D.
Noted. Alderman Veneziano.
Sorry, I know it's late, but if we're saying that we're not accommodating that you don't have to be a restaurant, then why would we say you have to have a hood? Aren't we kind of contradicting ourselves again?
A little bit. Sorry. So, quick show of hands to not deviate here too much. Those in favor of prohibiting a cigar store? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's unanimous.
So no change would need to be made at this time because there is no liquor license that exists with respect to that type of business.
Yes, thank you. Have we, Alderman Sonoyka?
To Alderman Veneziano's point, can we please have a straw vote for number 1 for the draft ordinance that requires that any establishment have at least one grill, gas or electric with an exhaust hood?
And what would you like to vote to?
I would like the vote to be those in favor of including this requirement
For the A3?
for
Or
the
all?
number 1 in the draft ordinance that says have at least one grill, gas or electric with an exhaust hood.
You're
The-
saying for every license that's listed there?
Which was.
Right.
Just to remove that, whether to keep that provision in altogether?
Yes, the vote is shall this remain in the draft ordinance?
Which was part of the discussion approved last time.
And city manager said that this was approved in the discussion last time. However, we did have several members that were absent at that special meeting, unfortunately, which is why I want to bring this up one more time.
And this was a previous provision in the former ordinance as it exists on the books with the clarification of the exhaust hood, which is how it's been interpreted. So
Correct.
I would appreciate that vote.
Okay.
Before I do the vote, I'm going to let
Thank you,
Alderman
Mr.
Diaz
Mayor.
speak.
I'm all in favor of the vote when there's 7 people here, when there's 7 aldermen present. Because right now, I'll do my Karnak impression. I can tell you what the vote's going to be. So I have no problem doing it when there's 7 elected officials here to vote on it.
The lucky thing for us is it's just direction for staff, and it's not an official vote
Okay.
anyway. And so,
Okay.
all those, now wording this to strike the line item.
Correct.
Right, so all those in favor of striking line item 1, please show your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed to striking line item 1. 1, 2. Did you?
I'm I'm just going to explain something real quick. Because we've already voted that you don't have to be a restaurant. That's why I'm willing to
Thank you.
strike it.
Okay. Moving on now to expedite this. Is there any further comments or discussion on this item?
No, but could we, I know it seems crazy, but could we also address a laundromat, even though I don't think that we're all looking for a laundromat with gaming, but I can see the application coming.
They've already applied.
They already
it's
applied.
already happening.
Thanks.
Your Karnak is working well too. All right, so
You don't have to have that to have any 3.
sticking with the same vernacular, all those in favor to prohibit a laundromat. All those in favor to prohibit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No verbiage.
Correct, no changes need to be made because they don't qualify in any of those liquor license classes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Can I ask one question real quick?
Sure. Yes.
Sorry. With our last vote, did we strike just the hood or the entire line that you no longer need a grill?
You lied the whole line.
The whole line.
The whole line.
Oops.
Okay.
Okay. Lucky for you, it wasn't an official vote. Is there any further comments? Or?
Voted that way.
So for purposes of me drafting what's coming before the council, should I leave that provision in there, or should I strike it out? Or should I only strike out the hood provision? I will say, if we strike out the hood provision, we need some clarification regarding what kind of grill is going to be
So there's-
required or what we're required
There
of our
are fire.
licensees.
There are fire codes, if I understand it correctly, with gas grills, and that a certain sized gas grill or any gas grill needs a hood for ventilation
You need to have
and
airflow.
fire
You have to
suppression
have
or
airflow.
whatever.
It has to be measured.
Electric up to certain sizes require ventilation and fire suppression inside them, and so I think we should let that, if we want to remove it, fine, but we have to always follow safety measures. So I think at whatever point it's required by fire marshal, that's then where you can go from the start for language.
It's just that we're not providing the clarification that's needed if we don't have this hood language in. If all of our restaurants have a hood, right? All of our restaurants that operate as a restaurant have a hood. The issue is the A3 license, being a bar, does not require a hood to operate as an A3 establishment. So if we, I just would like some clarification so I can properly draft it.
That's
If
fine.
we're striking it all together, that's fine, but if you would like to exclude the one class that doesn't have a hood from this requirement to have a grill and a hood, we can do that and still require the restaurant establishments that are in A1, A2, or D to be operating as a full-blown restaurant.
Thoughts from the council? Alderman Sonoyka?
I would support that.
Hear what people say.
I agree. I'm not a voting
Yeah.
member though, so so should we reevaluate the vote, or do you have clear enough direction to create the language for the time it comes before council?
So if we could have, is there support to keep line item 1 in?
Yeah, I think line item 1 is back in, but A3 is being carved out.
Of that line item 1?
Right, and you would just create the language to
Correct.
designate the difference between the two groups.
So that an A3 establishment would not be required to have a hood, but an A1, A2, or D establishment that are getting liquor licenses in conjunction with a restaurant have to have a hood.
Correct, because they have to meet safety protocol.
Okay.
So
So an A3 wouldn't be able to get a video gaming license.
An A3 would, they
They
wouldn't
would.
be required to have a hood.
Fair enough.
Okay.
You said the
That's
same
how-
thing? Yeah, I'm
right,
sorry, I
that's
just
how it'll be
misunderstood.
written.
Great,
But
thank you.
an A1 and A2 and Class D would have to have a hood.
Alderman Sonoyka?
Is it necessary to then include that specification, or can we strike 1 for the A3 and say that 1 is applicable for Class A1, A2, and Class D?
I would just exclude A3 from the hood requirement and put that language in there.
Very well.
Alderman Diastis.
So if an A3 can have video gaming, that means any new company that wants to come in and open up a bar and get an A3 can run his bar for a year and then get video gaming.
If the council opens up the G1 license to allow for that establishment to have it.
So, and if we allowed it for one, we'd set a precedent, we'd have to allow it for all.
No, you can,
Still a
you
privilege.
can limit the amount that you have at any time you decide to do it.
I think, in my opinion, that we're looking at a can of worms, and in my opinion, I say you leave it as it is and require everybody to have the grill and hood. And that's my opinion, and I'd ask for a revote on that.
Hold on one second. Alderman Veneziano?
We also put in there about the no more than 3 locations within the half mile. That would establish some locations. A new establishment may not even be able or eligible to apply. And again, it's a privilege. An establishment is not guaranteed that they're going to get that license. So if they're coming here as a bar, they're here as a bar and nothing more.
Alderman Sonoyka?
I would just echo Alderman Veneziano's sentiment with this, and I would support Alderman Diastis's request to provide direction to staff with another vote on this item, specifically with whether or not we want to carve out that A3 for eliminating the hood requirement.
And the grill requirement.
And the grill requirement.
The whole number 1
The
requirement.
whole number 1 requirement, if possible, yes.
Alderman Diastis?
Right now, the direction is to take out number 1.
That is correct.
I think we need to revote on whether we're taking out number 1 and then discuss the A3 part.
We are,
Go ahead.
I thought we already voted on whether we would take out 1, and we voted 4-3 that we would strike it.
Right, and I'm asking for a revote.
And I think we can just worry about voting at the time it comes before council. You have your direction on where to go with the A3 language and separating the two from gas grills, or do you require some clarity in order to draft your language?
No, I don't, but I'm working out the assumption that Alderman Bessetti changed his
His vote.
position,
Well,
because it was a vote
I
to
would like
strike
to
it
vote again
4-2.
on A1 and A2
Okay.
with regards to the number 1.
Manager Crumstock?
Can I just do a quick clarification? Maybe this will help you, Alderman Bessetti. So the clarification that I'm hearing is that number 1, have at least 1 grill, gas or electric, with an exhaust hood, would be operated for Class A1, A2, and D. New item, I'm not putting words into the city attorney's wording, but for an establishment with a Class A3, they would have to have at least 1 grill and just leave it that way because it does not have the hood requirement. That's how I'm hearing it, as A3 has now been carved out, the other one, A1, A2, and D, put in the grill with the exhaust hood.
So that's what I need clarification on, okay? The grill requirement has been interpreted to, a grill is synonymous with a grill and a hood. And so we're providing that clarification in this language right now. But that's how it's been interpreted, because any grill with a restaurant has to have a hood, okay? So I need the clarification as to whether A3 is included in both of those requirements. But I think to have a grill, that would also just to create the similar confusion that the grill is synonymous with a grill and a hood.
Because an A3 could operate with an oven, like a pizza oven that doesn't require ventilation and still produce hot cuisine.
The light food that's associated with
with
an
an
A3
A3
license, it does not require that operator to have a grill with a hood necessarily. So I need direction from the council whether we're requiring the A3 to have a grill with a hood or excluding them.
Alderman Diaz.
Thank you. I thought this was all agreed on last time, and that's why it's here, that even though
Which last time?
at the special council meeting, Mr.
Well, I'm trying to
Budmats,
figure out which last time, because.
the special council
I
meeting,
thought you meant the vote.
that's where this came from. That's what this was decided on. That's what I watched, that's what I heard, and now we're changing it all over again, and we're back into another 2.5 hour discussion on all this stuff, and there's not 7 people here. I would go with Alderman Veneziano, wait till we have 7 people here and let's talk about it, because otherwise we're going round and round and we're chasing our tails again.
I thought we were making good progress. Yeah, it's
until
lengthy.
now.
Yeah, it's extremely lengthy. This is an issue that does take some concentration, and you better believe when we start talking about cannabis or other contentious items, we'll probably be at nauseum and at length with those conversations. But that's what we're here to do. And it's a long-term outlook that we have to look at now. And all we have to do is make the determination that for A1, A2, and D, they require a hood. A3, no mention of a hood because that's not in the order of the food they prepare.
This does not impact the council's vote on whether they increase their G1 license number. This does not require that the council issue a G1 license to an A3 establishment. This only allows for it if the council at a later time votes to increase the number of G1 licenses.
Correct. So do you still require additional clarity?
If there's no opposition, from what I'm hearing, I would be writing this to exclude A3 from that line item 1 requirement.
Correct. So a quick show of hands to exclude A3 from that number 1 line item requirement. All those in favor to exclude A3? 1, 2, 3. All those opposed? 1,
Can I not vote?
2, 3.
Can we just vote on that?
Okay.
All right, moving on. Is there further discussion on this item, or can we move forward to billboards? Moving forward, Alderman Budmats?
Are we talking about grandfathering and transferability?
We did
Did
Are we
we
voting
transferability.
on those things?
Did
We
we
did
do that already?
Transferabilities, no.
We didn't vote on either of those.
I thought we did transferability.
I thought we did transferability.
We prohibited transferability,
Yes.
yeah.
Thanks. Okay, what about grandfathering?
No resolution.
No resolution.
Okay, well, so let's back up to grandfathering. What do we want to do about grandfathering? Grandfathering the 3 locations in the promise, I'm sorry?
You have a grandmother?
Oh.
Sorry. I'm getting goofy.
Slap happy.
Absolutely.
Grandfathering the 3 locations in the process permit or final construction, currently named Sally's, Shelby's, and Lulu's, all have plans for a grill and a hood. 1 location is almost ready to open, and they are before the Illinois Gaming Board for approval. Now, it says staff does recommend this item, but circling back to the beginning of this conversation, in the spirit of grandfathering, when we had the September 27th meeting, we only discussed those that were actively operating with licenses and serving patrons. And now there are others in the queue that are going to be considered as grandfathered in. Where do we stand on that?
My recollection on that is that, yes, we did talk about existing restaurants only, but there was also the topic of these 3 businesses that were already in the process of trying to get their liquor license and G1. prior to us revisiting the ordinance, and we never really got into what we want to do with those 3 businesses.
Okay.
Or people who were already in the process and had already applied for these things.
Alderman Sonoyka.
I would be in favor of grandfathering in these establishments in order to support the continuity of their business model and in the hopes that it would help them be successful in the future.
Any further comments?
So the purpose behind doing this was to eliminate the possibility of having people come in as I'm just going to say it, as a sham, that they're not really a restaurant, but that they're a gaming facility, and that we were trying to eliminate that possibility from happening. There was some feeling that we hadn't been completely successful, and that's why we needed to reevaluate the whole G1 license process. And so now, I guess the problem is that I don't know where these people are at in the process. Their license hasn't come before us. Their menu hasn't come before us. We know nothing about their business other than that they're in process. So I don't mean if they have a lease, or if they're just getting ready to sign a lease, or if they're ready to open tomorrow. And so I'm not trying to mess up anybody's plans, but I really don't want 3 more quote-unquote gaming cafes that also serve food to some degree. So we talked about having different ways of protecting ourselves, whether it was having their revenue in food and in whatever
Beverages,
sales,
yeah.
and beverage sales compared to their gaming. And we were told that the easiest way to do this was to have a 1-year waiting period. So in as much as we've already, as some would think, opened up gaming cafes because we weren't adequately protecting the integrity of this license, I'm concerned about not having a waiting period of some type so that we make sure that this really is a business that's beyond just a gaming facility.
Alderman Diastis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Alderman Sonoyka.
Okay. So what should we do for this?
Well, it's written here in the draft ordinance. There's proposed language, so guidance from the council for me to change it would be appreciated. Otherwise, it will stay unless I have.
And change it in what manner?
I would remove the parenthetical. The parenthetical is what
Has been mentioned.
grandfathers, is what would allow those establishments that already have, are in the permit process and final construction phases and have already referenced to the city manager their intent to propose their establishment in connection with the G1 license.
So a show of hands to remove the parenthetical.
Correct.
To allow those in the pipe to actually continue in this
Removal.
process. and
Removal
apply.
of the parenthetical would remove the grandfathering provision. Keeping the parenthetical would allow for those establishments to be grandfathered.
Alderman Sonoyka.
With this also, the grandfathering only refers to the 1-year waiting period. It does not refer to the city will allow no more than 3 licensed establishments to be located within the same half-mile radius, correct?
That's correct. Only to the 1-year waiting period. It would not eliminate the hood requirement in the grill, and it would not eliminate the half-mile radius or any other requirement in this ordinance.
Okay.
So as written, it grandfathers.
And all those in favor of allowing the grandfathering, show your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? Yeah, it's unfortunate. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. We actually do have a signature on the sign-in sheet. Melissa Buchholz, would you like to speak?
So, hi, I'm Melissa. My partner, Jerry, he couldn't be here tonight. He's my business partner. We have 3 other locations. We actually do have a lease with Sam at 2633 Kirchhoff. And we've actually been there, we've had the lease for a year now. And we've just been kind of waiting to see what, you guys were we needed some direction before we started really dropping money and, moving forward with the process. But I basically came tonight to see if you guys had any questions, like if you had anything to ask. I don't know, just to make you.
Alderman Budmats?
At your other facilities, what is the mix of your gross revenues in food versus gaming?
Well, so they're all different.
One has a sports section.
Yeah, I mean, so one is really large. So that is, the liquor and the food is way, the gaming doesn't even have a bearing.
So
It's,
let's exclude that one from this conversation.
Right. So, so Sweet Melissa's, we do a lot of food and beverage. But the gaming, it doesn't hurt. It helps us get through. There's slow times. We opened in 2015, so we've been open 4 years. So, and the gaming certainly doesn't hurt. It helps us through hard times, but it's not our main focus, and Lulu's is the same. We do a lot of food and beverage. We do a lot of bridal showers, baby showers. We have golf simulators there. There's other things that we concentrate on, but the gaming doesn't hurt.
So are there going to be any of those special features at this particular establishment?
This one is, it's going to be a slider bar. We're doing, that's the menu.
Sandwiches.
Yeah. So it'll be more sliders and, I don't know, we sent the menu over.
So, Mayor, actually, it's a smaller location than any of their other locations, so that's one reason why it's really just more sliders. But they did say later on, potentially, maybe they would take another site for some of those other activities, but this Lulu's is much smaller than the other one. Like I said, Sweet Melissa's is even larger than this location on Kirchhoff Road.
Right, but not by much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Further comments from the council?
One other item we didn't talk about, but we talked about it at the special meeting. It hasn't really changed here, but I'm getting calls from residents complaining about signs that say slots or basically advertising the idea of gambling, not of eating. And so in the current ordinance says that they will not place outside walls or the roof of the establishment or shopping area any video gaming wording or pictures. In addition, a partition, et cetera. But basically, there's not supposed to be a sign that says anything about gaming wording or pictures. And it's my understanding that we're getting past this by using permitting for special signage for like grand opening or closeout sale or whatever. So I don't understand how we violate the terms of our existing ordinance by applying for a building permit or a zoning permit. But I'd like to make sure that we close that language up and say that other than the first 15 days of opening a new facility, like a grand opening sign, there will be no words, or there will be no temporary signage allowed, whatever you want to call it, so that this loophole gets closed and that we don't have signs outside in front, huge banners saying slots, because that's what my constituents are calling me to complain about as they drive down Kirchhoff and Plum Grove Road.
I appreciate you bringing that up. Actually, I don't know if it was targeted or planned, but October 5th, 6th, and 7th, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I received calls from numerous residents about this same exact thing. And I sent a picture to Manager Crumstock, and the conversation was had at the 27th, and the short answer was they were able to get around it with a special permit request. but I do know that it's causing residents to call regularly and complain about it. And so we should look at some sort of language to augment this.
I believe we asked this question at our special meeting, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't we say it was almost a First Amendment thing that we can't, I mean, they could say American Nazi Party on there. They could say whatever they want on there.
Well, content-based regulations implicate the First Amendment, and there's a strict scrutiny standard, and you have to show that there's a substantial government interest in restricting the language. So it's a high burden to me, but anytime there's a content-based restriction, there's going to be a First Amendment implication.
Is there anything we as a council or committee can do to assist the residents who are passionate about not wanting to see this? What can we do?
What the council can do is do appropriate time, place, and manner restrictions that are not content-based with respect to signage.
Manager Crumstock.
That actually brings up, obviously, with Public Works behind me, it's a great time for you to give your comments on signing and sign code changes, because the zoning code is being redone, and I am pretty sure behind me there are two people chuckling at that. Three? Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know Rob was going to laugh at it, but I knew Joellen and Elizabeth would. But if you want to give your comments to that as they bring it back to the Planning and Zoning Commission before it comes back, that's the great opportunity to revise signage and sign responsibilities for the city of Rolling Meadows.
Okay. And that would probably be more comprehensive than just the G1.
Putting the year in.
Okay. All right. I think we're good on this subject. Move along. Billboards? Signs?
Not mine.
Okay. Well, then let's go ahead and move on to Ms. No.
Okay, we never answered his question about laundromats and car washes and stuff.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did.
We said no.
Yes, we also.
Okay, Joel.
Sorry, Joellen, the floor is yours.
Excited to talk about another controversial topic like
Thanks for
billboards? Sure. A lighter topic, maybe. I'm here in October as a follow-up discussion to a discussion we had in August. Went through some history with you. I really was looking for some consensus from you to take a pause while we go through the sign code update before we vote on any specific requests for variations or exceptions to our existing regulations. And I think the council generally agreed with that, and we wanted to do some research. So I'm here to update you on that. I'll try to move through that very quickly. We are making some progress on all of the items. Some of the items we're still waiting for some feedback, so this is an update, and I do expect that we'll come back. Also, real quickly, in case I forget, we do have Sam Rohde in the audience, who was here at the last meeting as well. He represents the prior petitioner for that billboard on Tollview that was heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission in January, and then ultimately withdrawn as a result of some of the conversations that we've had. He's very willing to work with staff and the community on making sure this is something that we want to move forward with, and didn't want his consideration of his item to kind of get in the way of that. So we appreciate that. So moving on to some of the conversations, just a real quick recap on what we heard you wanted more information on at the last meeting. Number one, this idea or concept of a public-private partnership. This was introduced by Sam as part of his project on Tollview Road, so I have a little bit of an update on that and what we've accomplished so far. More feedback on the impact of billboards on property values, so I'll go through some of that in the staff report and in the slides. Tax generation of billboard properties, again, I'll talk a little bit about what we did do. I'm still waiting for some feedback from the Palatine Township Assessor to get a little bit better data on that, but I'll provide you with what I have. And we have been reaching out to the owners of the I-90 corridor to see if we can get some feedback from them, because again, keep in mind, we're comparing what we have today, which is billboard overlay district north of Euclid, kind of built out, and now there's obviously pressure to expand that into other areas. And the area on Tollview is kind of opening up that I-90 corridor, which is our economic development area. So we really want to get some feedback from people on that. So that first one, I'm going to go through them in a little bit more detail. That public-private partnership, again, introduced by our applicant, who has since withdrawn that petition. You asked that we get some more information from him. We did meet with Sam and his team and talked through some of the proposals that they had mentioned in some of the meetings. And if you recall, they talked about a network and having Forest Park be one of the first parties to be part of that network, and then ultimately several communities would be able to benefit from this type of a proposal that they're working on. At the time we met with them, there are no other agreements. I was kind of hoping we could use a boilerplate and kind of bring that back to you. But instead, what Sam agreed and provided to us was a letter of intent, or an LOI. We did receive that letter of intent and forwarded it to our legal counsel, Jim McCall, who has taken a look at that agreement and is in conversation with Sam's attorneys, who are setting up meetings. Last week, when Sam gave me a call, he advised me that they were making progress on those conversations, but that his attorney wasn't going to have enough time yet to get that to our attorneys for review. So this is something we do expect to come back with you on more information on the legalities of this so-called public-private partnership. One of the things that came up as part of that was the Chicago Digital Sign Program. If you recall, one of the things they referenced was they wanted to model it after this program. And so we did obtain a copy of that program, and the ordinances are very large from the city of Chicago. And in reading through that, the one thing I can point out at this point is that it is a program that is targeted only to properties that are owned or controlled by the city, which, if you think about the city of Chicago, they control a lot of public rights-of-way, they own properties along the expressways. So it does not apply to projects on private property. So it is a little bit different, because if you own the property, you have that negotiation strategy of being able to give something in exchange for something. In other words, you're giving them a lease on the property in exchange for payment. The alternative to that is that if it's on private property and the council is giving, or the community is giving zoning approval, we have to ask ourselves, what are we getting in exchange for that? And that's kind of that whole concept of contract zoning. I don't want to get into that because, again, that's the topic that the attorneys will be discussing. Sam is very positive that his lawyers are putting together some information for our review that he believes will allow us to support the project without being concerned about contract zoning. So again, more to come on that at the next meeting when we discuss this. Focus a little bit more on the impact of billboards on property values. The concept here is that I wanted to take a look at properties that are north of Euclid, near some of our billboards, and whether the presence of those billboards has an impact on their values, and compare that with properties along I-90 that don't have billboards today, and what is that comparison? This isn't an exact science. Obviously, we're going to look at a very small area, a small subset. So, is it statistically significant? Probably not. There's probably 100 people who would be able to come before us and say 100 reasons why we shouldn't look at this data, but it is the best data that we have at this point. So we look at EAVs, or equalized assessed values, which are assigned by each township assessor. And in Cook County, the EAVs for these types of properties are assessed at 25% of the fair market value, or FMV. So kind of put that in perspective a little bit. As we all know, we all own property, and we have PIN numbers, or parcel index numbers, and they show up every year on our property tax bill. And that tax bill comes together from a variety of factors. beginning with the value assigned by the assessor. What I want to point out, and another imperfection of this method, is that billboards can be on a variety of different types of property. So, in the left picture on the slide, you see a very small piece of vacant property. So those drawings show the pins outlined in light green and the buildings within that project. That project is on the northwest corner of Euclid and Rowling Road, and it's the Arlington Business Park property. It contains as a whole the billboard on that triangular shaped piece of property, which is less than a half an acre, has no other buildings. So there's going to be a value assigned to that, which is specifically to the billboard. Contrast that with the property on the right, which is a property off of Industrial Drive that's a 4-acre parcel, contains a very large, I think it's 40,000 square foot building on that property. That property also contains a billboard, but it's just separately shows the different types of properties that we're looking at values for. So why is this important? This is kind of a timely discussion given your earlier conversation with Finance Director Gallagher on setting of levies and property taxes, because we want to make sure that we're diversifying our economic base, all in the name of trying to lessen the tax burden on specifically our property owner, our homeowners, but really all property owners. This slide at the bottom there is blown up here to provide you a little bit better detail. It's available on the Cook County Assessor's Office website, and it's a pretty good slide that talks about how our taxes are generated. If you start on the right side of the slide, that assessed value comes from that fair market value, and again, for commercial properties, that's 25%. If you take all of those assessed values and add them together, you get the sum of what all of the assessed values of the property within a group of taxing districts would be. You compare that to the area on the left, which looks like a little school building. So it's the municipalities and school districts and park districts and all of the taxing bodies get together. And that comment at the top left is what's important. And I think Finance Director Gallagher did a good job identifying that, is that we budget or we levy, then tax, we don't tax, and then spend. So when you guys were looking at your budgets today, you were coming up with an amount that we were going to levy, right? We weren't talking about individual tax bills. So when you compare those two and divide the fair market value into the budgets, you get that tax rate, and then the tax rate is what is applied to each individual assessment to get your personal tax liability. Again, this is a very oversimplified calculation. I don't want anybody to think that any of these numbers have to do with any one property, but it demonstrates the importance of trying to make sure that we are maintaining or increasing the value of our properties in the community. So on the left, so there's two sides, the left side and the right side. We see properties 1 through 5 in the first column. The second column gives an estimate of the EAVs for each property. And just for sake of ease, let's say they're all worth $200,000 and all 5 properties would total $1 million. Obviously, you have a share, then you're a shareholder in what you pay in taxes, and that's represented in the third column. The fourth column gives you an idea of how the tax rate is calculated. So it says levy amount of $500,000 generates a tax rate of X, and that tax rate is 0.5. So in order to get that tax rate, you take $500,000 and divide it by the total EAV for the properties, which is $1 million. And in that example, in that last column, taxes paid, you see that each of those 5 properties would pay $100,000. And here's where the comparison, here's the important part that comes in. On the right side, just for sake of argument, say that one property goes from $200,000 down to 0. And you have all of the assessed value in that area shared by 4 properties. So instead of being a 20% shareholder, you're now a 25% shareholder. Even if the budget is the same, so in that third column, levy amount of $500, it's the same levy amount or budget amount, because you're sharing it on a lower amount of EAV, the tax rate goes up. So instead of 0.5 as it was on the left, it's 0.63 on the right. And the individual taxes paid by those properties are $25,000 more per lot. Again, this is way oversimplified, but it is meant to illustrate why it's so important for us to maintain and increase the values of our properties. So in looking at the billboards in the Arlington Office Park project that I referenced earlier, that map shows that same location that we looked at. That property has, I think, 6 different pins. So, you know, again, people have the ability, despite how the property is subdivided, to go to the assessor's office and break their property into multiple pins. And this property has several. They have chosen to separate their billboard into that small rectangular or triangular shaped property in the upper left-hand corner. Between 2015 and 2018, those are our 2 years that we looked at, billboards on the site, that billboard increased in EAV by 5%. That's the only property on that project as a whole that increased in EAV. All of the others in the office park decreased collectively by 13% between 2015 and 2018, or from about 1.16 million down to 1.02 million. What's interesting in looking at some of the history of this development or this request for the billboard, which was authorized in 2015, is they came to you with the comments that they needed to generate more revenue. They were struggling, they had vacancies, they needed the additional revenue so that they could invest in their property to address this problem that they had of chronic vacancy. Fast forward to 2019, they're still suffering from chronic vacancy. Every year, as you probably know, people who have vacancies can appeal their assessments to the assessor. They have, and they have had successful appeals to lower their EAV every year based on vacancy. And remember, every time somebody lowers their EAV, somebody else has to pick up that difference. Moving north, so I kind of used this whole area on the east side of 53 or 53 between Rowling and Euclid and Industrial, and looked at the rest of the properties and their impact on the remaining properties. There's one additional billboard at the far north end, so that triangular shaped piece of property at the far north also contains a billboard. It also increased in value by 13% as a single property. The picture in the middle there shows that property with its billboard and with its cellular tower, so they've kind of got a double bonus of extra uses on that site, so they are increasing in value. But when you look at the property, I drive by there every day, there's maybe a couple of cars there, I'm not real sure if there's a business there, if it's largely underutilized and underimproved. The parking lot looks like it could use some investment. But again, they're getting enough revenue, they're increasing in EAV, so it really doesn't provide much of an incentive for people to invest in the community. The remaining properties in the area, one of the other ones that's impacted greatly is the 100,000 square foot building that's just north of Arlington Park. So in the picture on the right, that's the biggest or the largest. It's about 100,000 square foot building. Again, that property has been about half vacant for the last several years, and they have just approached us about coming in and looking at a 6B incentive from Cook County, which we're going to be processing and bringing to you. Again, looking for ways that they can stimulate investment in that area, but again, suffering from chronic vacancies. It's not all bad in the area. The Bear Construction property seems to be doing very well. It also had positive growth between 2015 and 2018 overall. The views there show kind of the northern view and the southern view. The building looks nice. I don't know if they do any marketing materials, but sometimes they'd probably want to cut the overhead wires and all the aerial equipment out to showcase their very attractive building. That picture kind of in the middle there shows the view from the expressway. They actually have their own freestanding sign out on the expressway, so I just wanted to show that for comparison. So looking at the impact of the billboards on property values, we also compared it to the properties on the I-90 corridor. And except as noted, the increase in EAVs was between, I'm sorry, I think I missed a slide here. Or one got, so I did lose a slide in there somewhere. So we had a slide in here that showed that most of the properties in this area have increased in EAV with the exception of the 4 properties that are shown. The property on the immediate west side, which is the tall Chase Bank building, decreased in EAV between 15 and 18 by 26%. As I indicated in the staff report, we didn't really look into what some of the reasons behind that might be. But we did also look at the other sites in that stretch along that's outlined in red. The proposed billboard site is shown on that property. It has decreased during that time frame by 2%, and the 2 buildings to the east of it have also decreased by 9% and 4%. Other than that, all of the other properties have increased, and almost half of those, or over half of those, have increased by double-digit increases in that same time frame. The tax generation of the properties, there's a little bit better information in your report, but it's a big table and I didn't want to lose it on a screen here. Again, I show the locations of each billboard, and the percent increase or decrease on this slide is given. The information in your report shows the total EAV, so the tax generation is something that's a factor of the total EAV. So if there's a higher EAV, you're going to get a higher tax generated by that property. But keep in mind, it could be because there's a big building on the site as well. So this is the question that I'm waiting on some response from the Palatine Township Assessor to explain that, help me explain that to you a little better. So once I hear from them, I'll share that a little bit later. Again, we talked to 2 property owners along I-90 to get some feedback to answer that last question, number 4, that we got from your last meeting. The first one was the atrium project that's shown in the picture at the bottom of the slide. Both of the properties that we talked to generally were not supportive of introducing billboards along the I-90 corridor, and I included some of their comments in your report and on the slides. The atrium folks that we talked to thought it would be detrimental in their efforts to attract and retain Class A office tenants. So these folks are competing with other office products in the suburban area that are also trying to attract large corporate clients, and they feel like if those communities don't have those competing visual stimulus for the tenants, that they might lose the tenants to those other areas. One of them claimed that the higher vacancy equals lower fair market value and therefore lower EAVs and less taxes to the city, higher taxes for everyone else, which is that slide I went through earlier. They said that Class A tenants demand uninterrupted visibility to their building signage. And again, they understand that it wouldn't be here, but if it was across the street or within the corridor, that it would be detracting away from their corporate identity, which is their buildings and all of the investment they make in the buildings to make them be attractive, but also the signage that's on the building. Similar comments were received from the towers when we visited them. Interestingly, when we went on that visit, they're completing a very intensive $15 million transformative renovation project. A lot of it is to, again, add those amenities that the Class A tenants are looking for and that are being offered in other suburban areas. So they also felt like adding billboards would just make it harder for them to compete for those spaces. We do need further analysis, as I said. We'll come back to you after our attorneys have reviewed the public-private partnership legality with Sam and his team and give you a follow-up on that. We do also expect a follow-up from the assessor on whether billboard EAVs or fair market values are included in the EAVs and how that works. We do have we're outreaching to other I-90 properties. I'd like to try to get some of those smaller properties in, not just the big corporate ones, but maybe some of those on the north side to get their perspective on it as well. And then again, just confirming that you're kind of still on board with this concept of holding off on any further considerations until we bring you the zoning code update in early next year. Questions, comments?
Alderman Sonoyka?
Assistant Director, could you clarify what is meant by the Class A tenant?
Class A tenants are some of your corporate tenants that usually need the higher square footages. They're bringing in employees that are more technically oriented. Class A tenants, Class B tenants. So the Class B is typically smaller and.
It's also how they do some of the renovation and remodeling, so it's higher end furniture, higher end, you would say, accessories, and that's what they're always looking for. So you take Continental Towers, when you walk in there, you look at the tile, you look at the lighting, you look at some of the staircases, but that all goes back into what is Class A, Class B, and Class C are predominantly for when you're looking for a location.
So then as a follow-up, since some of these locations were in a manufacturing district, would it be fair to expand our informational interviews to tenants that would be looking in a space that's not necessarily for high-end corporate Class A, but for manufacturing?
Yes, that is one of the things that I'd hope to do as we've reached out to others and focusing on those buildings that were on the north side that we did the EAV comparisons to find a couple of those. Sam's property owner client is on that side as well, so we'll be reaching out to them to get those additional comments.
Thank you so much.
Alderman Diaz.
Yeah, as kind of a follow-up to Alderman Sonoyka, the two buildings, Atrium and the towers, would this sign, I mean, I thought Atrium was off of 53, not 290. Would this sign, this proposed sign, yeah, that one, how is that going to impact them? Aren't they like miles away and on different streets? I mean, I'm just kind of curious.
On the other side of 90.
Yeah. So how, I mean, I understand what they just said, but I don't understand why they would say it when this sign doesn't seem to be anywhere near their buildings. So I think you're finding out what the immediate buildings on the north side there, what they say is going to make a lot more impact to me than the other ones, because I don't see how that one billboard is going to impact either of those two office buildings.
I think, and I agree with locationally, but one of the concerns that they have is that there won't just be one. Once you open it up, then, just like occurred on the north side of town, everybody then, how large do you draw the district?
Right.
And if you draw it small, you're still going to have somebody come in and say, well, why don't you increase it a little bit? Because the state lets us go, 500 feet apart. So let us, so we keep getting that. Come back and talk again, just similar to the
The overlay district.
Yeah.
So maybe a way to solve that is that they could donate the land to the city where they want to put the sign, and then they really could have a public-private partnership. We could lease it back to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, then it would be truly, and it would fit the Chicago model, and then we would control where it happens because we would own the property.
Right. It's a great idea.
Further comments, discussion? So I thank you for the presentation, but in the recommendations, there's some other areas of consideration. And so I wanted to just walk through them and ask for a little bit of extrapolation so council can give you direction. It says further consideration might be given as to whether billboards should continue to be allowed in Rolling Meadows. Are you looking for council direction on this conversation?
On this conversation, no. I think we were hoping, based on the last conversation, that we would get through all of this analysis and the sign code update, because I know the Planning and Zoning Commission also has input and hopes to provide you additional feedback on that as well as part of that comprehensive update.
And then as far as, if not, should elimination schedule be considered? Following that, if billboards are to remain, how should they be regulated for height, width, gross size, space separation between individual billboards and structures? Would you like feedback or conversation on?
If you have feedback, that would be great.
Does council have any input on any dimensional constraints or requirements? Anything? Some recommendation, Alderman
I
Cannon?
think, Mr. Mayor, I mean, in my tenure here, everybody that's come before us to put a billboard up had to show us the dimensions, so we had a say on everyone that's gone in. I don't know if we wanted, I don't know if you're asking, do we want to get a standard size? I don't know. I guess it really depends on the location, because some of them are farther away from the highway, so they're bigger.
Sure. Yeah, the question just states if billboards are to remain, how should they be regulated for height, width, length, gross size of face?
I think it's a reasonable question. I think it's just hard to give one standard answer, though, I think.
Okay. So we don't want to standardize
I don't think it's possible, really.
Okay. Alderman Sonoyka.
I would like to defer to the Planning and Zoning Commission with regards to those items.
Okay. Alderman Veneziano.
I apologize, it's late, but I just want to kind of ask a question. So when a person comes with an application for a billboard, it goes to Planning and Zoning Commission, and then it comes to council for approval. And this might be, is that correct?
Let me give one little bit piece of more information. So right now, there are very few, if any, locations that comply with our current code.
Okay.
So everything that we are getting now requires an amendment to our code. So the question is, do you want to amend the code to open the additional areas up?
So that would pose my second question is, as a council, do we want staff to continue hours working on this if, as a council, we're not going to approve amendments and more billboards? Or are they working on something that we're not going to approve? I pose that question.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The reason we're having to do this is that we're already full in our, I mean, we've allowed all the, at one point we didn't have all those billboards along Route 53. I'm sorry, I'm not talking into the mic. We didn't have all those billboards along Route 53, but over the last 15 years, I was actually on the Planning and Zoning, we've seen all of them come one by one, and populate the area that we had designated for billboards. I personally don't see any reason to deviate and allow any more in any other spot, because there was reasons why we didn't want them along those other areas before.
Manager Crumstock.
Just for clarification, so go back in the Wayback Machine, the city of Rolling Meadows was trying to restrict how many billboards were in there, so we had an overlay. So that overlay has been changed a little bit by people coming back and asking, and you are correct, it goes to Planning and Zoning Commission. They make a recommendation, and it comes to the city council. So the Planning and Zoning Commission, actually, the chairman sitting behind me, I just heard him chuckle, I think. They're on record that they would prefer less billboards because it is becoming a different look. But at the same point in time, I want to say probably in the last 4 years is really when you've seen a lot more of the billboards between Lamar, Green Signs, and some of the other ones that you have. And typically, when they get over a certain size, then you are asking for a variance at that point over additional size. So as one of the owners of a billboard, that's the city of Rolling Meadows, we do own one of those, and that is in the original overlay.
Alderman Diastis.
Thank you. I'm always of the opinion that we need to investigate and see if there's a benefit to having something, whether it's a billboard or whatnot. I mean, in this case, what caught my attention was the public-private partnership and the fact that the city could get upwards of $100,000 a year, which fixes a lot of roads over the course of 10 years or 20 years. So, I mean, if there was nothing in it for the city, then, then what's in it for the local businesses? Does it help? So, I'm not going to close my mind to it. I'd like to hear more, but, I'd just like to hear more before I just say, no, totally not interested, because especially in this site, I've seen it, there's no residential there. It's strictly the highway. So I'd like to know what the neighbors, this neighbors say about this, if they're for it or opposed to it. Neighbor businesses.
Anything further? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for presenting.
I just want to point out Sam is in the audience, and I don't know if he wanted to.
That's where I'm going right now with the signature, because there is one name left, and that is Sam Rhodey.
Hello, members. I will spare you any comments. I wanted to be available to answer any questions you may have at this point.
Are there any questions from the council? Alderman Diastis, any questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay. No, thank you.
All right, thank you.
I swear the next one's short.
Yeah, we'll see about that. So that brings us to the 2020 community events.
Obviously, we just want to present because we would start posting and actually advertising, but we do want to thank the 30 active volunteers approximately who really help us on community event. They're really an integral part on helping all the community events that continue to grow and develop. If you'd like to participate, volunteer. We're always looking for volunteers. We have monthly meetings. The current volunteer roster has just been great, but anything that you can help is always needed, and especially for fundraising, setting up, directing vendors, assisting residents, parking and cleanup. But in 2020, we actually have proposed, and that's the last page of your item, the full list of events. And what we actually would like to do is for the meet and greet that we did once this year, we actually have plugged in two. It would be June and September at the market. And the markets would continue 5 times during the summer. New for this year would be 100% that the Community Event Foundation will be taking over the St. Patrick's Day dinner. Obviously, the Rotary folded, and we'd be working with the Park District at that point in time. The Veterans Dinner, the Veterans Committee actually decided to move it from Memorial Day weekend to actually Veterans Day weekend. So that's a slight change in one of the events. It actually helps staff, which is kind of taxed on that Saturday for everything that's going on. But again, it goes back to what is Memorial Day and what is actually Veterans Day. Block Party, we are back on Central Road, 2020 and beyond. We thought it went very well this year. We had a lot of people walking on Central Road. If you want additional parking, you can always go to Alderman Diastis. I think it was $5 a spot. Okay, went up next year. But again, we thought it went really well. We have some changes that are actually going in there. The parking lot party, that's actually one that the Community Event Foundation and the city are actually kind of giving to the Park District 100%. They're able to absorb this at this point in time. We've been able to provide the music and a whole bunch of other things, but with this, the parking lot party is really going to be the sole responsibility of the Park District. Holiday celebrations, this is actually a two-part discussion. Obviously, as we've mentioned before, for 2019, we are moving it to this museum site on Central Road. The spaghetti dinner will be at Will Bend School. We're talking about a horse-drawn wagon ride to bring you between the two, and then hopefully we can get a little items to make it look a little more festive. And then 2020, we're looking at potentially some more decorations as it continues on. And there is more of a discussion about the date and date change. But again, overall, what we're trying to do is continuing the events. It is our 65th anniversary for the city of Rolling Meadows next year, and we did put in some additional money to actually get additional items for each of the events, and hopefully each of the events, but also dealing with the music. But again, for anybody at home, we're still doing the Taste of the Town in February, the Business and Community Showcase in April. Friday Rock and Roll starts our summer series, would start June 19th. We would have a July 10th, a September 18th. Memorial Day Parade and Ceremony will still happen that Saturday, so that would be May 23rd. The Block Party on Central Road would be Friday, June 12th. The 4th of July Parade and Fireworks is still on July 4th. And then Family Night for the Rolling Meadows, that's our Saturday event before National Night Out, would be Saturday, August 1st, which I would actually make the plug for Cornfest is also held that day. National Night Out is the first Tuesday of August, so Tuesday, August 4th. Wind Down by the Creek will be Friday, August 14th. The Senior Luncheon will be September 8th. The Hometown Hoedown will be Saturday, October 3rd. The Veterans Dinner, as I mentioned before, will now be moved to November 6th. And then the holiday celebrations will be Thursday, December 3rd, which is the first Thursday after Thanksgiving. And what we actually want to make sure that everybody knows that funding for these events does come from the city of Rolling Meadows. It obviously is through the general fund and the Community Event Foundation. So any donations to the foundation go back to anything that we're able to provide. With that, if anybody has any questions, comments, or if I have anything else, I said I would keep it quick.
Alderman Sunoika.
I had some residents that really appreciated the meet and greet with the city council at our final city market and requested that we actually extend that to every city market if possible, with the understanding that not every member could make every single one, but to at least have a booth going forward.
We can make a booth available, but again, what we would really like to hype is that those two, specifically June and September, we would really wish that all 8 members of the city council would be there, but we can make sure that there's a booth out there if anybody else wants to walk in.
Thanks.
Any further comments? Alderman Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple quick thoughts. I noticed on here, Barry, that you're going to extend some holiday decorations on Barker, and I'm fine with that. I guess I'm just being a little bit selfish, but it would really be nice if the city looked at something west of 53, anything, because we just kind of get blocked out of everything. We have a nice little retail quarter on Plum Grove Road. I know there's not a lot of light poles there, but we got Kirchhoff poles going out. So, and the other thing is, December 3rd is basically the same thing we're at right now. That didn't move it up at all.
And it's more discussion.
I mean, everybody else does it so much earlier than we do. I just don't understand why we're so late. And the weather's usually a little bit better in November, marginally. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Further comments? If not, then that concludes the 6 items for the committee of the whole, and there is a request to go into closed session this evening. It does require a motion and a roll call vote, and this is a request to discuss personnel 5 ILCS 120-2C1 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Is there a second? Thank you, Alderman Veneziano. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Veneziano. Yes. Bessesi.
I guess so.
Yes.
No.
Really? Okay, Sunoika.
Yes.
Cannon.
I'm really excited about the opportunity.
Me too. Bud Matson.
Can't wait.
Well, we have our answer. I just want to remind the people in the audience that the council does not plan on returning or taking action. So have a good evening.
Make them stay.
I should.